Shadow Slave. Chapter 61-61, Sea of Ash. 1596 words. In the morning, Sunny woke up feeling grim and uneasy. The memory of the frightening dark mirror was still fresh in his mind, making every shadow seem sinister and foreboding. He scowled sullenly. What the hell, I'm the child of shadows. Why do I have to be afraid of my own domain? But then again, darkness and shadow were not the same, even if a lot of people tended to mistake one for another. Shadows were born from the absence of light. A nascence, they were manifestations of emptiness. True darkness, on the other hand, true darkness was its own entity. A nascence, shadows shared more in common with light than they did with darkness. I mean, I guess they do. Do they? Philosophical debates with his internal monologue were not the best way to start the day, at least as far as Sunny was concerned. His already sour mood only got worse. With a short sigh, he sat up and stretched his arms, yawning. Good morning. The sound of his voice was almost drowned by the echoing noise of rushing water. With the sun rising, the dark sea was in a hurry to retreat. Sunny was finally able to relax a little. Morning. Neffis had been guarding the camp during the latter part of the night, so she was already awake. As usual, she was meditating with her eyes closed, in the absolute darkness of the night, watching over. Something actually meant listening for suspicious sounds, so keeping Oneshayas open was not that useful. For everyone except Sunny, that is, who had perfect night vision thanks to his attributes. Hearing him stand up, Changing Star slowly opened her eyes. A soft afterglow left behind by the dancing white flame could still be seen in near depth, quickly disappearing as her sight adjusted to the twilight of dawn. She looked at Sunny and offered him a polite smile. In the past 2 weeks, Neffis had also been training, perhaps even more diligently than him. However, she wasn't trying to improve her swordsmanship. She was actually trying to learn how to behave like a normal human. As a result, their interactions had become slightly less awkward, for the most part. Sunny was able to recognize Changing Star Schwartz because they were very similar to a face he himself had gone through many years ago. On several occasions, he had caught her intently observing how Cassie talked and behaved around them. Sometime later, Neff would randomly try to mimic small details of her friend's behavior. The results were a mixed bag, to say the least. The first time she tried to greet him with a smile in the morning, Sunny panicked and almost summoned the Azure Blade. However, Neffis was very smart and persistent. Today, her polite smile looked almost natural. He had no idea why Changing Star decided to work on her social skills, of all things, during their perilous journey through the monster-infested hellscape that was the Forgotten Shore. But he didn't admit, it was actually rather entertaining to watch. Watching her torture herself every day, enduring terrible pain in hopes of learning to better control her aspect ability, on the contrary, was not fun at all. They never talked about it, but Sunny knew that every time Neffis pretended to meditate, she was actually subjecting herself to the excruciating agony of her flaw. When he thought about it, his heart ached. Sunny wasn't used to feeling such things, but he suspected that this was what other people called compassion. At least it was similar to how it was described in books and dramas. Not that Heck knew a lot about that stuff. After they had breakfast, Neffis stood up and looked at the beam of light falling through the nearest gap between giant vertebrae. Turning to Sunny, she said, "Let's study the surroundings." They needed to get the lay of the land and decide what their next step. Usually, that implied looking for the nearest natural features that were high enough to stay above the surface of the sea and deciding on which one they would try to reach next. Then came a day or two of scouting and hunting, followed by moving the camp to that feature. Sunny gave her a nod. All right. He summoned the Echo to guard Cassie while they were away and left the shadow behind to keep an eye out, just in case something happens. Then Sunny followed Neffis to the gap. Boosting her, he watched as Changing Star flew through the air and then seemingly ran up the wall, kicking herself off at the last moment and propelling her body even higher before grabbing onto a bone protrusion. Relying only on her upper body strength, she then climbed up and disappeared into the cascading light. Soon, the golden rope fell down, allowing him to follow. Neffis helped him climb atop the gargantuan spine and then straightened, turning to take a look west. Sunny shook his hands and did the same, expecting to see the usual picture, an endless expanse of the crimson labyrinth, dotted here and there with rare high points. However, what they saw left them both speechless. Some distance away, the labyrinth seemed tallest color. The crimson blades of coral stood gray and misshapen, as how struck by some unknown disease and drained of fall life. The stone-like material looked brittle and fragile, ready to crumble to dust at any moment. The patch of dead coral spread for as far as I could see. Further away, the walls of the labyrinth seemed to have collapsed into a sea of ash gray sand. This ashen wasteland looked alien and strange after weeks of seeing only the endless crimson pathways that Sunny felt ash shiver run down his spine. The fact that they didn't notice even a single monster moving through the mud beneath made him feel even more disturbed. There was only one visible high point to the west of them. Far away into the distance, the ground rose, forming a tall hill. The hill was probably the largest they had seen, easily capable of becoming aerial island once the water rose in the night. Its shape reminded Sunny of a colossal barrow. Covered in the gray sand left behind by dead coral, the hill resembled a mountain of ash. That mountain was crowned by a giant tree. The tree rose into the sky like a tower, its branches wide enough to cover the whole island in their shade. The bark of the giant tree was as black as water of the dark sea, while its leaves were red as blood. Contrasted against the gray sky, the crimson crown of the majestic tree looked incredibly vibrant and magnificent. Sunny gulped. What the hell, ice that? Neffis was either thinking or had nothing to say. She just stared into the distance, a slight frown on her face. At that moment, something glistened brightly from beneath the tree. The glimmer was clear and easily visible even from their position, like a beam of sunlight reflected by a large mirror. A moment later, it was gone, only to appear again after a few seconds. A mirror. Sunny shivered, remembering the previous night. For some reason, the bright glimmer suddenly seemed to become menacing. After some time had passed, head dressed Neff again. What do you think? She lingered a bit before turning to him. While Changing Star was deliberating on what to say, He glanced at the ashen wasteland again. Finally, she spoke. This ice the only way west. Sunny grimaced and looked away. He didn't like this turn of events one bit. So, where going? Neffis turned to face the giant tree and, asked how affected by its grandeur, hesitantly shrugged. Dao have a choice. Sometime later, they abandoned the remains of the giant sea monster and moved west, planning to check the situation inside the wasteland that lay between them and the ashen barrow. Initially, they weren't planning to approach the strange island. However, things turned out to be unusual once they entered the wasteland. With gray sand under their feet and dead coral walls surrounding them, the group was fully prepared to face unknown danger. Despite the fact that they had not seen any monster moving through this area from the top of the Leviathan's spine, neither Sunny nor Neffys truly believed that no one was going to attack them in this strange region of the labyrinth. There were too many ways for the nightmare creatures to hide themselves, and if there was one thing the sleepers had learned during their time on the Forgotten Shore, it was that everything here was either deadly or concealing something capable of killing them. In that regard, their first encounter with the carnivorous worms was especially traumatic. However, their common sense turned out to be wrong this time around. The wasteland was quiet and empty, completely void of any signs of life. The absence of monsters was, in theory, supposed to make Sunny feel better, but felt even more nervous than usual instead. This whole situation reeked of danger. It was strange and unnatural. Even the monsters were afraid to approach this place. What were they doing walking deeper and deeper into the wasteland of their own free will? Were they fools not to turn around and run away immediately? Soon, they reached the point where the walls of the labyrinth had crumbled into dust. Now, there was nothing but a vast expanse of gray sand between them and the hill crowned by the giant tree. Nothing could hide on that ashen flat. However, they would also be unable to conceal themselves from anyone's gaze. Sunny glanced at Neffys. Are you sure you want to do this? Changing Star scowled and lowered her chin. Then, looking forward, she scowled and said, let's go. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads, redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 62 to 62. Hide and Seek. 1,444 words. As soon as he left the familiar confines of the labyrinth and stepped into the vast expanse of the ashen wasteland, Sunny felt strangely uncomfortable. It was asked how he had unknowingly turned slightly agoraphobic while traveling through the complicated madness of the Crimson Maze. He had grown accustomed to being surrounded by tall walls of coral, with endless tangled paths stretching in all directions for as far as could see. Despite the fact that the labyrinth was hiding numerous dangers, it also offered a strange sort of safety. At least in the case of Sunny, who had the advantage of being able to see beyond its twists and turns thanks to his stealthy shadow scout. Now, with gray sand beneath and nothing to break the line of sight, he had lost that advantage. The idea of not being able to hide from the enemy made him feel naked. Keep cool, there's noon here. That thought, which was supposed to calm him down, had the opposite effect instead. Indeed, there were no nightmare creatures anywhere in the desolate wasteland, but why was that? What made them so eager to avoid this place? Neffys was walking in the front of the group, with Sunny right behind her. The Echo was in the rear, moving at a slow pace. Hel looked around and, after a bit of hesitation, said in a low voice. I didn't like this. Neffys glanced at them with her usual indifferent expression. Turning away, she simply said, stay alert. They continued forward insolence, sand squeaking under their feet. A dozen or so minutes later, Changing Star raised her hand, gesturing them to stop. Turning to Sunny, she asked, has your shadow noticed anything? He shook his head. No, there are some irregularities here and there, like small knolls or shallow pits, but nothing is moving. Mostly, it just seems flat and lifeless. He turned to Cassie and asked hesitantly, do you hear anything? In some cases, her keen hearing was more effective than his shadow sense. When they were caught by the storm, Cassie had been able to sense that something was wrong long before her seeing companions noticed anything. However, this time it was of Nouse. She simply shook her head, indicating that there were no unusual sounds around them. Neffy sighed and lowered her head, thinking. Then she cast a gaze at the distant ashen barrow. Let's continue. However, she did change the direction of the group slightly, aiming to approach one of the knolls that Sunny had noticed. By the time they approached it, it was already noon. The sun was right above their heads, making their shadows small and shapeless. Sunny's sound shadow had returned and was now hiding beneath his feet, looking like a formless blob of darkness. This time of day was its least favorite. Neffy summoned her sword and slowly approached the knoll, trying to determine its nature. There was nothing remarkable about it except for the fact that everything around was flat, and it was not. The knoll was about as tall as Sunny, somewhat oblong and covered in the same gray sand as rest of the wasteland. It didn't seem dangerous, but there was no harm in checking, well, most likely. Maybe it could provide them with some useful information. Just as Changing Star was about to stretch her hand and touch the surface of the knoll, Sunny's shadow suddenly noticed something moving in the distance, back at the edges of the labyrinth where they had come from. Acting on instinct, Sunny jumped toward the Echo and hissed to Neff. Hide. At the same time, Hetty's missed the hulking scavenger. Suddenly losing her mount, Cassie flung her hands up and fell. Catching her in the Princess Scary, Sunny darted toward the knoll and lowered himself to the ground, placing the blind girl between himself and crouching Neffy's. Changing Star put one hand on Cassie's shoulder and looked at them with a silent question in her eyes. Danger. Sunny raised one hand with his palm open, telling her to wait. His shadow was already peeking from behind the knoll, carefully observing the source of the movement. Already some distance away, the dead walls of the labyrinth rose from the gray sand. Suddenly, one of them collapsed, knocked over by a massive figure. Surrounded by the cloud of fashioned sand, the figure moved forward, stepping onto the flat surface of the wasteland. 8 legs, 2 terrifying bone scythes, black and crimson carapace that looked like ancient armor that had been splattered with blood, another centurion. Sunny silently cursed. They fought these monsters twice before, and won both times. However, that was because each battlefield had been carefully prepared to stack advantages in their favor, with plenty of planning and devious scheming on their part. Huey sensed that they would be able to kill one in a direct confrontation, at least not without suffering serious damage. Turning to Neffy's, Sunny whispered. A carapace centurion had just walked out of the labyrinth. She scowled. Cassie, meanwhile, lightly touched his hand and asked, where is it heading? Sunny blinked, then concentrated on the shadow's vision. Soon, he exhaled with some relief. Looks like it's heading for the ashen barrow. If we stay hidden behind this knoll and it doesn't change course, there's a high chance that it won't notice us. Changing Star thought for a second and then nodded. Keep an eye on it and tell me as soon as something changes. Trying to become as small and silent as possible, the three of them pressed their bodies to the knoll. There wasn't a lot of space to hide, Sunny had to endure being cramped against each other. Well, maybe, endure, was not the right word. Sunny might have even enjoyed the situation in other circumstances. What are you thinking about, fool? Concentrate on the deadly monster. He thought angrily, berating himself. But it was so hard to concentrate with Cassie's soft body pressed against his. Deadly monster. Finally able to get his mind out of the gutter, Sunny sighed and focused on observing the Centurion. The hulking creature was moving through the wasteland, slowly drawing closer. Soon, he was able to see every crimson line and every spike on its weathered carapace. However, his eyes were glued to something else. Cautiously held between the Centurion's scythes, a beautiful crystal was gleaming with hypnotic inner light. It was bright and strangely alluring. A transcendent soul shard. They had already seen a similar scene, back when a pair of Centurions were retrieving 2 of such crystals from the remains of the giant shark-like creature. So that was their destination. Sunny glanced at the magnificent tree standing atop the ashen barrow. With its onyx branches and vibrant scarlet leaves, it looked striking and majestic. Like something wholly hidden in the depths of hell. He shared his findings with the group, careful to keep his whisper as quiet as possible. The Centurion was about to walk past their hiding spot. Despite the fact that there was some distance between its path and the knoll, Sunny was still nervous. This was the most dangerous moment. The monster came level with the knoll, then proceeded forward without blinking an eye. He exhaled. It's walking toward the barrow. Nephews did not relax, still ready for things to go south at any moment. Follow it. Sunny nodded. A moment later, his shadow slid from behind the knoll, sneakily pursuing the nightmare creature. With how much the range of shadow control had improved, he was pretty sure of his ability to tail it to the footsteps of the ashen hill. The Centurion crossed the wasteland with the transcendent shard clasped tightly between its scythes. Its bearing was somewhat strange, seeming almost pious. It looked like a pilgrim walking toward a mysterious, sacred site. Soon, it approached the ashen barrow and suddenly stopped, asked how afraid to cross some invisible line. Then the Centurion carefully placed the shard on the sand and backed away from it, its eyes turned to the ground. After distancing itself from the gleaming crystal, the massive creature kneeled. Sunny had tore up his eyes to make sure that he wasn't seeing things. He wasn't. The carapace Centurion bent its 8 legs and lowered itself to the ground, submissively placing its terrifying scythes in front of its bowing torso. Noticing Sunny's strange behavior, Nephies raised an eyebrow. What is it? He hesitated. Wait. At this moment, his shadow, which was safely hidden some distance away from the kneeling monster, noticed a slight change on the surface of the ashen barrow. The bright glimmer they had seen from the top of the Leviathan's spine was back. Only this time, it was even more blinding. The glimmer rose into the air from the shadows cast by the branches of the towering tree and moved, slowly approaching the footsteps of the hill. When Sunny was finally able to discern the source of the shining, his eyes widened. Feeling a cold shiver running down his spine, he forgot to breath. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 63-63, Lord of Ashes. 1,559 words. Moving through the ashen sand and piles of fallen leaves, a giant monster was coming down the hill. Sunny gulped, his expression turning dark. The creature was as large as a house, with its 8 segmented legs resembling tall pillars. Its form was similar to that of scavengers and centurions, comprised of fat crab-like carapace and a protruding, somewhat humanoid torso. However, this was where the similarities between them ended. Instead of chitin, the behemoth's shell was seemingly made out of polished, lustrous metal. It was asked how its whole body had been once submerged into a crucible of molten steel, emerging from it encased in an impenetrable suit of shining armor. Beams of sunlight were reflecting from the chrome surface of the carapace, creating the bright glimmer Sunny had noticed. Massive but strangely elegant, the steel monster resembled a giant knight. Sunny was ready to swear that he had noticed the shapes of 7 stars carved into its chest. However, that knight was corrupted and evil. It radiated a sinister aura, like a demon summoned from hell to sow death and slaughter. The polished armor of the creature was covered with long, jagged spikes. Its humanoid torso had 4 mighty arms, 2 ending with powerful pincers, the other 2, with razor-sharp, terrifying scythes. The demon's head was more pronounced than that of a scavenger and crowned with several tall, sharp horns. Its metal face was almost human-like, but simultaneously repulsively monstrous and bestial. Just looking at it made Sunny's skin crawl. That thing, scary. Whatever that creature was, its rank within the Carapace Legion was clearly higher than that of a Centurion, not to mention of a lowly scavenger. It was the next step in their evolution. Agoneral or a commander, perhaps. What were they called? Legates? Praetorians? Holding his breath, Sunny watched as Carapace Demon descended from the ashen barrow. Stopping in front of the transcendent soul shard, it looked briefly at the kneeling Centurion. The deadly awakened monster shrank under its gaze, as if terrified of the larger nightmare creature. Sunny knew how it felt, since headed the same when the behemoth Shayas had briefly glided past his shitting place. Not paying the Centurion any attention, the Carapace Demon picked up the gleaming crystal and turned around. Then, Attune hurriedly returned to the shade of the giant tree's branches. Sunny slowly exhaled. Sunny, what is happening? He looked at Cassie, whose face was full of worry and curiosity. After hesitating for a little while, he said, "There's a new threat. Stay quiet a bit longer, I'll explain later." Back at the footsteps of the tall hill, the Carapace Centurion was finally ready to stand up again. Sunny was in a dilemma. He had to follow the monster to make sure that it doesn't stumble on their hiding place on its way back to the labyrinth. However, he was also extremely curious to see what the Carapace Demon was up to in its lair on the top of the ashen barrow. There was no time to think things through properly. Making a hasty decision, Sunny sent his shadow sliding over the gray sand. It masterfully avoided the Carapace Centurion Shayas and was already climbing the tall hill a few seconds later. One look, I'll just take one look. Hiding in the deep shade cast by the majestic tree's scarlet crown, the shadow glided up the slope and approached the place where the Carapace Demon had disappeared from its sight. On top of the hill, the ground was covered with fallen leaves. The ashen barrow was indeed larger than any high natural feature they had encountered before, vast and spacious as on actual island. However, the traces left behind by the massive creature spiller-like legs could be easily seen. They led the shadow to the center of the island, where the obsidian tree's enormous trunk was rising from the ground, with its broad roots stretching in all directions. The Carapace Demon was standing beneath the tree, looking up at its lower branches. The transcendent shard was still clenched in its pincer. What is it looking at? Sunny made the shadow trace the creature's gaze and noticed several round, appetizing fruits hanging between the scarlet leaves. One of them looked especially ripe. Suddenly, the demon dropped the soul shard into the sand and, completely forgetting about it, raised its body. It stretched a pincer. Yu Pan gently grasped the fruit, then pulled on it. Without any resistance, the fruit tore off the branch. Holding it as something fragile and extremely precious, the massive creature slowly lowered itself to the ground. Then, it carefully brought the fruit to its mouth and took a small bite. It's eating fruits. This abomination is vegetarian. Bewildered and not quite sure of what he had just seen, Sunny had no choice but to command his shadow to leave and hurry to the base of the hill. The time was up, and if he wanted to catch up with the carapace centurion, he had to act with haste. Gliding over the fallen leaves, the shadow descended from the ashen barrow and flew back in the direction of the labyrinth, soon catching up with the retreating monster. Phew, feeling a lot of relief, Sunny made sure that the centurion's route would not put him on the collision course with the knoll they had been hiding behind and finally allowed himself to relax. Slightly, he waited until the side-wielding monster was completely gone before slowly rising back to his feet. It's safe to come out now. Neffys and Cassie stood up, stretching and massaging their limbs. Suddenly remembering how tightly they were pressed against each other while hiding behind the knoll, Sunny just barely avoided turning red with embarrassment. Was a necessary measure. He was almost glad that the carapace demon had appeared at the perfect moment to take his thought away from that situation. What happened? Neffys looked at them and raised an eyebrow. For once, her expression of fine difference did not look very convincing. Sunny glanced at the not-so-distant ashen barrow and shivered. There's danger ahead. We need to return to the Bone Ridge. I'll explain everything once we're safe and sound, back at the camp. She opened her mouth to say something, but then thought better of it and remained silent, simply giving him an. The trust they had built was enough for that much, at least. Sunny summoned the echo, tied the golden rope around its torso, placed Cassie's makeshift saddle back on its carapace and helped the blind girl climb to her seat. Picking up the saddlebags, he fixed them back onto the scavenger and took a step away. They were ready to go. Before that, however, Sunny had one more thing to do. Coming close to the knoll, he used his hands to brush the sand off its surface. Soon, the onyx black surface was revealed beneath. It was the same exact color as bark of the colossal tree growing from the center of the ashen barrow. The knoll was, in fact, just a small portion of the tree's stoned roots, raised slightly above the ground in this part of the wasteland. Sunny looked around, trying to calculate the size of this Ceofash. Finally, he was starting to understand what had drained all life from the giant patch of the Crimson Labyrinth. Back inside the Bone Ridge, they were sitting around the fire. The delicious smell of roasting meat filled the air, making Sunny's stomach produce embarrassing sounds. However, it wasn't time to eat yet. He was in the middle of telling the girls about what he had seen. After the centurion kneeled, another carapace creature came from the top of the ashen barrow. Only this one was not one of those we had seen before. It was easily twice the size of the centurion, 6 or 7 meters tall. I can't even imagine how much it weighs. It looked like a moving house. Neffys frowned, clearly not happy talk now that there was such a behemoth barring their way. What's more, its carapace is not made of chitin. Instead, it looks like some strange metal alloy. I didn't think we'll be able to cut through it. I also didn't notice any gaps in that monstrosity's armor, not even around the joints. Cassie gulped, turning her head to her friend. Changing Star, however, remained silent. Sunny sighed. In addition, that thing has 4 arms instead of the usual 2, a pair with pincers and a pair with scythes. 3 even bigger than the centurion's. Its carapace is littered with spikes, and it has long horns on its head. It also looks, more human-like. It almost got a face, albeit an extremely ugly one. And its eyes, well, I think that is more sentient than anything we had faced before. Neffys was thoughtful. After a while, she said, Itis probably an awakened demon. Nightmare creatures with 1 soul core were called beasts, the ones with 2 cores were called monsters. 3 cores belong to a class of creatures known as demons, with devils, right above them with 4 cores. Sunny gave her an nod, indicating that he was in agreement with her conclusion. Or maybe a devil. In any case, I think we should avoid that scary bastard at all cost. Changing Star stared at them, tilting her head a little. For a minute or so, there was only silence. Sunny gritted his teeth, then sighed, then blinked a couple of times. Finally, he gave her a doomed, crooked smile. Let me guess, you want to kill it. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 64-64, Pursued by Demons. 1,130 words. Let me guess, you want to kill it. Neffys continued to stare at them with her usual unreadable expression. After a while, Sunny chuckled and shook his head in disbelief. You really are crazy. That's no again demon we're talking about, remember. Have you forgotten that we're just sleepers? Then he frowned and scratched his head. Wait a second, I feel like we already had this conversation before. Doesn't it feel familiar? Cassie turned to face the two of them and politely cleared her throat. Actually, you had said pretty much the exact same thing right before we decided to attack that first carapace centurion. Sunny beamed. Yes, exactly. And how did that end up? I almost got killed. Neffys shrugged indifferently. You survived, didn't you? He froze with his mouth open, too flabbergasted by the sheer audacity of her remark to answer immediately. A few seconds later, Sunny was finally able to speak again. That's not the point. Cassie gently touched her friend on the shoulder and whispered. Neff, that's not a very nice thing to say. Changing Star's face flushed a little. Glancing aside, she hesitated and said, what I meant to say is, we won in the end, didn't we? It was a risk we had to take, and it paid off. We've grown stronger since then. Sunny had a feeling that the fight against the carapace demon was already inevitable, but couldn't bring himself to stop protesting, solely out of principle. But that thing, it is huge. It is so you won't even be able to poke it with your sword. What are we going to do? Asked the bastard politely to lower itself to our level. Neff frowned and looked at them with displeasure. It's just an awakened demon, I know. Sunny sighed and shook his head again, feeling like he was talking to a stone wall. Changing Star's mind was still a mystery to him. He had realized a long time ago that there was a deep dark well hidden behind her seemingly radiant exterior. No one pushed themselves that hard, endured that much, went that far unless they were being pursued by demons of their own. Heck knew that from experience. And judging by how far ahead of everyone he had ever known Neffys was, her personal demons were especially dreadful. Much more dreadful than the terrifying carapace demon, at least. But although Sunny understood that she was running from something, he had no idea what destination she was so desperate to reach. Just why was she so hell-bent on finding that damned human castle, even more so than Sunny himself? His burning desire to come back to reality and rip all the rewards that the world owed him was so intense that it would frighten most people to death. There were very few things that Huey sent willing Toto to achieve his dream. However, it only had meaning for as long as she stayed alive. Neffy's, on the other hand, seemed to persuade a goal that held more meaning than her life. Why else would she be willing to risk it? Sunny just couldn't understand that logic. It was irrational and paradoxical. What can be more important than your life? If you die, you want people to enjoy the fruits of your labor anyway. He looked Neffy's in the eyes and said, back when we agreed to fight the Carapace Centurion, we did so because there was no other choice. We were literally stuck on a rock with it. What about now? Didn't we have a choice to avoid the Ashen Barrow? She stared at them for a while and then simply said, that's the only way west. Sunny laughed. That is the truth, I'll give you that. When his laughter died down, he wiped the corner of his eye and said, all right, that makes sense. But believe me when I say it, as only one who actually saw the Carapace demon, we want people to defeat it in a fight. Neffy scowled. Your point. Sunny spread his hands. Didn't misunderstand. Yes, we can defeat it. But, a dark smile appeared on his face. That doesn't mean that we can kill it. Changing Star thought about it, then raised an eyebrow and asked, you have a plan? Sunny shook his head. Not yet, not entirely. Let me sleep on it. However, there's something I know for sure. He looked west, remembering the Carapace demon's disturbing, bestial face. In the ensuing silence, Cassie turned her head to face him and asked with curiosity. What is it? Sunny blinked. Oh, yes, it's pretty simple, really. Unlike the scavengers and centurions, that thing appears to birth or intelligent, which means that it can be deceived. They spent another uneventful night inside the dead Leviathan's spine. As far as their camps went, this one was probably the safest. There was a certain comfort in being surrounded by walls from all sides, even if they were made out of bone. Sleeping on top of cliffs and coral mounds, just meters away from the surface of the dark sea, exposed to elements, was not very restful. Sunny even entertained the thought of suggesting to Neffys that they should stay here for a while, a few weeks or even months if needed. They could slowly explore the surrounding areas, hunt monsters and grow stronger. Then, after absorbing hundreds of soul shards and shadow fragments, armed with dozens of memories and even a few more echoes, perhaps they could attack the Carapace demon and be more sure of success. However, he quickly realized that it was a bad idea. The Forgotten Shore was perilous and unpredictable. They were rather successful in conquering its dangers so far, but it was too easy for the situation to change. One moment of bad luck was enough to doom them. One wrong turn, one unfortunate encounter, one more enemy than they were able to handle, and their lives would be over. And that was only in regard to the usual menagerie of abominable horrors they had to fight on a daily basis. The labyrinth hid much more terrifying secrets and existences, not to mention the unimaginable terrors of the deep dark sea. Every additional day they spent here gave a chance for something fatal and unavoidable to happen. Their best hope of survival was to face the Carapace demon as soon as possible. Maybe after defeating it, they would finally be able to see the tall walls of the promised castle. Sunny tossed and turned the whole night, thinking about the giant creature and trying to give shape to the nascent seed of the idea of how to kill it. Close to the morning, he was finally able to fall asleep, only to be awakened by Cassie carefully shaking his shoulder half an hour later. Sunny blinked, looking at the blind girl in confusion. What is it? She gestured to Neffys, asking her to come closer. Then, a little pale, she gathered her courage and said, I had another vision, a vision about the Carapace demon. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 65-65, Lights in the Darkness. 1,310 words. Sunny was instantly wide awake. Sitting up, he hurriedly rubbed his eyes and then glanced at the blind girl, ready to listen. Neffys approached them and sat down, her face barely visible in the dim light of the early dawn. Past or future? Sunny blinked. Right, I should have asked myself. Cassie thought for a bit and then hesitantly answered. Past, I think. After a short pause, her expression changed to that of certainty. No, I'm sure of it. Changing Star slightly tilted her head. That is good. So, what did you see? Cassie deeply inhaled and fell silent for several seconds, remembering. Her face paled a little, but this time, she was ready to face her fear. I saw the Ashen Barrow deep at night, enveloped in a raging storm. The winds were bending the branches of the great tree, as if desperate to break them. The island was illuminated by the constant barrage of thundering lightning bolts, with rain falling from the skies like a flood. She paused, catching her breath, and continued. The Carapace demon was there, standing in the middle of the storm like an unshakable fortress made of polished steel. Arcs of electricity were dancing between the spikes on his armor, but the demon did not pay any attention. He was just as Sunny described, prideful, sinister and terrifying. Cassie closed her eyes. When I looked into his eyes, I felt a sense of emptiness and corruption. He observed the storm until it began to dissipate. The winds weakened, the rain stopped. The great tree stood unbroken, just as magnificent as it was before. But then, the last bolt of lightning fell from the sky and struck the ground beside it. Sunny was listening to her tale with great attention, hopeful to hear a piece of FUSEFUL information. So, that monstrosity is not afraid of lightning. Shame. With its metal carapace, I was almost tempted to tree and lure it from under the tree during a storm. Apparently, that wouldn't work. Meanwhile, Cassie was ready to carry on. That bolt of lightning could never hurt the Carapace demon, let alone the miraculous tree. However, when it hit the ground, it ignited the fallen leaves that cover the Ashen Barrow face. Soon, a large part of the island was engulfed in fire. In the absolute darkness of the night, it shone like a beacon. Sunny perked up, remembering something. Back when the three of them first met at the beginning of their deadly adventure through the dream realm, the girls mentioned that the light he had seen from the giant knight statue a few nights prior was indeed made by them. However, making that fire had turned out to be a big mistake. At night, any source of light was like allure for the monsters of the Forgotten Shore, including the terrifying creatures that lurked in the depths of the dark sea. Fatsy, ever since, they were careful to never light a fire after sunset, preferring to enter the darkness instead of attracting unknown horrors from beneath the waves. Having a guess of what had happened next in Cassie's vision, waited for the blind girl to continue. Her voice trembled a little. Before the flames died down, the dark sea surged, and a thing crawled out of it, covering almost the entire slope of the ashen barrow with its body. It looked like a mass of bones and rotten flesh connected by black seaweed, with thousands of horrible eyes staring at me hungrily from beneath. Coiling tentacles seething as it pushed itself toward the great tree. Her face turned slightly green. Just remembering the abomination made Cassie feel nauseated, but she gritted her teeth and did not stop speaking. That was the most repulsive creature I've ever seen. However, it seemed slow and clumsy, as how being ashore, outside of the black water, was weakening it. The carapace demon did not hesitate to lunge at the creature, completely ignoring the fact that it was at least 10 times his size. It was like had completely lost his mind, enraged by the intrusion on the island. Nephi suddenly spoke. How did the demon survive? The blind girl hesitated. I didn't know. It didn't see the battle itself, only its beginning and its end. At the break of dawn, the carapace demon crawled back into the shade of the great tree. He was severely wounded, with several of his legs missing and his sides covered by a spiderweb of cracks. The fire was gone, and there was no sign of the sea creature anywhere in sight. She paused for a moment and then said in a quiet voice. The most terrible wound was on his chest. The steel armor of the demon was fractured and split apart, revealing the beating heart inside. Rivers of blood were flowing from the wound, mixing with the ashen sand. The demon crawled to the base of the tree and laid his broken body between its roots. Cassie sighed. The last thing I saw was the passage of time. I didn't know how long it took, but eventually, the carapace demon was able to recover from his wounds. His sides restored themselves, his legs grew back. The fracture on his chest was the last toe hell. However, it wasn't held completely. Hidden from sight, there's still a weakness in his armor. Both Sunny and Nephies were silent for a long time, thinking. Changing Star was the first to break the silence. So it's not impenetrable after all. Then she looked at Sunny and asked. How's your plan coming along? He blinked, extricating himself from the swarm of thoughts. Glancing at his companions, Sunny smiled. Pretty well. I already had an inkling of how we should proceed, but Cassie's vision gave me additional inspiration. Nephies raised an eyebrow. Is that so? He gave her a confident nod. Yeah, it's a wild idea, but it might just work. Well, maybe. In any case, it is going to be risky. And we'll have to make some preparations. Both Cassie and Nephies looked at them expectantly. The blind girl cautiously asked. So, what is your plan? How are we going to deceive the demon? Sunny crossed his arms. It's not very complicated. Actually, I got the idea from that ancient fellow Neph likes to talk about. We are going to build. He took a dramatic pause, and then said with a mysterious smile. A Trojan ass. However, their reaction was not what he had expected. Both girls blinked, then stared at them with complicated expressions. Well, Cassie did not stare, since she was blind, but her face was exactly the same as Changing Stars. Strange. What now? Sunny scratched the back of his head, somewhat embarrassed, and cleared his throat. Did I use the wrong word? It thought that Odysseus guy built a wooden animal. Donkey. Nephies raised a hand and put it in her forehead, closing her eyes. Weird. Does she have a headish? Are you alright? She sighed deeply, then said in a flat tone. A horse. It was a horse. The next day, they returned to the place of the battle between the Carapace Legion and the centipede monsters. A few days earlier, they had lured a Carapace centurion here to ambush it, but ended up causing a massive confrontation between the two tribes of nightmare creatures. The carcasses of some of the monsters were still there, buried slightly in the mud. Of course, there was no meat left once their skeletons. The inhabitants of the labyrinth were for the most part carrion eaters, after all. However, the three sleepers were not interested in meat. They came for something else. Stopping in front of the centurion's empty shell, cleaned open flesh by some unknown beasts, he looked at the black and crimson carapace in satisfaction. Nephies walked over and stood by his side, an unreadable expression on her face. Is this what you wanted? Sunny smiled. Yeah, exactly. I knew that nothing would be insane enough to chew on the chitin, but, in this place, you never know. I wasn't sure about its condition, but the condition was good. In fact, it was perfect. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 66-66, first part of the plan. 1,300 words. Close to the evening, with the sun tiredly descending toward the horizon, a strange creature walked out of the colorless remains of the labyrinth. If walking was even the right word, dragging its legs in the sand, the creature somehow floated forward without moving them. It looked like a carapace centurion, or at least a close approximation ophone. All the necessary parts were in place. The creature had a black carapace with amanacine crimson pattern on it, a humanoid torso, 8 segmented legs and 2 arms ending with formidable bone scythes. However, all these parts looked mismatched and strange, as how put together by some clumsy sculptor. Additionally, the centurion moved as if it was seriously drunk. The carapace was careening to one side, sometimes scraping against the sand. The torso was swinging back and forth for no apparent reason. The scythes were awkwardly lodged behind the creature's back, crossed against each other at a strange angle. At some point, one of them simply dropped to the ground. The centurion stopped and hesitated for a few seconds, asked how unsure what Toto. Then it left its scythe arm behind and continued on its way as if nothing had happened. A perceptive observer would have noticed that the creature seemed to possess 2 shadows. The first shadow was as Sohn would expect, its shape identical to the creature itself. The second one resembled a human. It briefly showed itself from beneath the larger shadow when the centurion abandoned the runaway limb. The human shadow then proceeded to facepalm and shake its head in utter contempt. The whole situation was nothing short of being completely bizarre. But, for better or worse, there was nobody around to notice the weird creature. Unobstructed, it traversed the wasteland, moving in the direction of the ashen barrow. Soon, it was almost at the footstep of the tall hill. The sunset was approaching. The strange centurion plopped on the ground at the base of the ashen barrow and stopped moving completely. Awkward and lopsided, it looked like a parody of the other monster OFIT's kind who had kneeled gracefully at the same spot a few days prior. Additionally, a tariff without a tribute. There was no transcendent soul shard in sight. Added to the disrespectful pose, this transgression was more than enough to get the centurion killed. Perhaps, it was suicidal. On top of the barrow, the carapace demon moved and rose from the ashen sand. His shining armor glistened, reflecting the light of the setting sun. Encased in bright metal, with a crown of horns adorning his head, the demon looked fearsome and sinister. Gazing down, Hal endured for a few moments. Two dark scarlet embers ignited in the depths of the demon chayas. Shifting his terrifying size, the giant monster walked forward, slowly descending from the hill to face the strange visitor. The ground shook as Ash approached. However, the bizarre centurion did not even flinch. In fact, eyed remained completely motionless. The carapace demon stopped some distance away from the suspicious creature. He observed it, clearly understanding that its pathetic appearance might beat rap. The labyrinth was full of unimaginable dangers. Rashly approaching an unknown foe was not something an awakened demon, who possessed his own form of intelligence, would do. At least that was what the three sleepers had assumed. However, they were wrong. Just a second later, the carapace demon lunged forward. Its side flashed through the air, severing the centurion's torso in half. The adamantine chitin was cut apart, asked how it was made of butter. The upper half of the monster's torso flew off, revealing only emptiness inside. Once the other side of the ashen barrow, Sunny, who was running up the slope with all his might, cursed under his breath. That was too soon. He thought that they would have more time. Who knew that the carapace demon would turn out to be a daredevil? He didn't even hesitate before going all out. With Cassie riding piggyback on his back, Sunny gritted his teeth and tried to run even faster. It was time to switch to plan B. A moment later, the weird centurion's carapace came apart, setting the echo that had been hiding underneath it free. Pushing the pieces of chitin away with its powerful pincers, the scavenger rushed toward the towering demon. It was aiming to duck underneath it and, hopefully, mess up the Jont's legs. The first part of Sunny's plan was rather simple. They were going to toss the remains of a dead carapace centurion to disguise the echo, which was much smaller in comparison, the son of the officers of the carapace legion. Then, they would send it to the base of the ashen barrow to lure the demon away. The three of them were going to circle the hill and hide themselves under the grey sand in advance, then run up the slope into the center of the island as soon as demon had left. The echo was supposed to buy them enough time to climb the great tree and conceal themselves in its branches. Then, Sunny would dismiss the echo, thus finishing the first stage of the plan. He never intended for the scavenger to actually fight the fearsome demon. However, the carapace demon's unusually swift act of aggression had messed up the timing of the whole thing. The decoy was already destroyed, yet they weren't even halfway to the tree. In this situation, there was no choice but to order the echo to attack, hoping that it could stall the giant monster. That way, of course, Sunny was putting his scavenger at risk. But there was no other choice. Just as was about to reach the crest of the hill, the echo tried to hide itself beneath the carapace demon's massive body. It was doing the same thing that Nephis had done when fighting the first carapace centurion, intending to oust the size of the enemy against it. The difference was that this time, the smaller participant of the fight was clad in a sturdy carapace, as opposed to a squishy human girl who had no protection. Even if the demon tried to crush the scavenger with its weight, it wouldn't be able to kill it. However, the demon understood it too. Moving with incredible speed, he shifted his torso and struck out with a pincer. The scavenger was swatted away like an irritating insect, flying through the air and heavily crashing onto the ground. Its carapace had almost cracked. Running toward the great tree, Sunny grimaced. He wanted Toadies miss the echo, but knew that it was too soon. They needed more time. Ahead of him, Nephis was already approaching the enormous black trunk. Not wasting any time, she removed the seaweed rucksack from her back, gently laid it on the ground, and began climbing, grabbing onto the cracks of the onyx bark. Meanwhile, the echo was shakily rising to its legs. A stubborn light was burning in its eyes. Producing a loud screech, it clacked its pincers in the air and once again rushed toward the demon. Go get him, buddy, Sunny screamed inwardly, wishing his scavenger luck with all his heart. The smaller creature bravely ran toward the steel behemoth, raising its pincers to attack. It was followed by two shadows, one bestial, the other one human. Sunny was quickly shortening the distance to the great tree. Below the hill, the carapace demon calmly stepped toward the rushing enemy. Its forearms moved in unison. Suddenly, the scavenger's arms were sliced off. Its body was gripped into giant pincers and raised into the air. Sunny didn't even have time to react. A fraction of a second later, the demon slightly strained its arms and tore the echo in two, separating its torso from the carapace and crushing both halves into a bloody pulp. On top of the hill, Sunny stumbled. The familiar voice resounded like a tolling bell in his ears. Your echo has been destroyed. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads, redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 67 to 67, Racing Against Time. 1,601 words. Your echo has been destroyed. Sunny stumbled and almost fell. Cassie gripped his shoulders tightly and leaned back a little, trying to help him keep balance. With fallen leaves flying from under his feet, Sunny somehow managed to catch himself in time. No, anger and regret clouded his mind, but it was too late to do anything. His trusty scavenger was dead, sliced and torn apart by the giant creature. The ease and brutality with which the carapace demon had decimated the poor, brave beast would have been insulting. If it wasn't so terrifying, it only took him a split second. The echo was gone. Not only had Sunny seen its tragic end through the eyes of his shadow, he also felt the subtle connection between them disappear. In his soul sea, one of the spheres of light shimmered and vanished, leaving the silent surface of the water a little bit darker. He had lost his most valuable possession, but the bitterness Sunny felt was not only because of how useful the echo had been, or how much money it could have brought him in the real world. He had actually grown to like the mindless scavenger quite a bit. It was big, loyal and reliable. It even seemed to possess a strange sort of stubborn, off-putting personality. And now it was dead. Gritting his teeth, Sunny ran like a madman. There would be time to mourn the loss of the loyal echo later. Right now, they had bigger problems. Sunny, what happened? Cassie's whisper sounded worried and tense. She must have felt the change in his mood through his posture and body language. To be completely honest, Sunny was in a shape to talk. Running up the hill at top speed, with the blind girl on his back, no matter how delicate and light she was, had been a tall task for him without the support of the shadow. He was struggling to breath, and there was still a considerable distance to the great tree. However, Sunny had tones, his voice hoarse and rugged. Heckle the echo. Then, there was no time for words anymore. Because things were turning from bad to worse. Down at the bottom of the hill, the carapace demon was standing above the mutilated remains of the scavenger, looking at them with contempt. Heavy drops of Officer blood were falling from each of his 4 upper limbs. Suddenly, the corpse of the echo began to shine with soft light. Then, it shimmered and dissolved into a river of tiny sparks, which then fell to the ground and disappeared, leaving no trace of the hulking scavenger behind. Even its blood on the demon's scythes and pincers was gone. After all, the echo was just a knife station Fastlane nightmare creature and not the real thing. It came from nothing and was now returned to the state of nothingness. However, the carapace demon was not looking at the unexpected light show. Instead, he was staring at a particular spot on the ground. There, a lonely human shadow was frozen in confusion, uncertain what to do. With the body of the echo, and consequently, its spacious shadow, gone, it was instantly revealed and had nowhere else to hide. Crap, the demon tilted his head, then moved with the speed of lightning and pierced the shadow with a scythe. Sunny flinched, ready to experience blinding pain. But nothing happened. The shadow, which had raised its hands in fright, looked down at the massive blade protruding from its chest and scratched its head. It was completely fine. Well, of course, it was just a shadow, after all. One had to have a body to be susceptible to sick attacks. Right, what else did I think would happen? Meanwhile, the demon was staring at the nonchalant shadow. The menacing scarlet light in his eyes blazed brighter. Sunny was getting closer to the trunk of the tree, temporarily fueled by adrenaline. Otherwise, he might have fainted from the strain already. Just a little more. They had every chance of making it. The shadow just had to distract the giant monster for Abbott. But it seemed as how luck was not on his side today. Down below, the carapace demon retrieved his scythe. However, instead of attacking the human shadow again, it suddenly turned around and cast a dark look at the top of the ashen barrow, where the giant tree stood in all its magnificent beauty. The bastard was smart after all. Curse Edel. Forgetting about the shadow, the behemoth lunged forward, rushing back up the tall hill slope. It moved with frightening speed, covering attos and meters with each second. Get back here, Sunny screamed. Tohi's shadow Ash approached the trunk of the tree. Helping Cassie climb down from his back, Sunny picked up the rucksack that Neffis had left behind and handed it to the blind girl. Beg until with that, Cassie nodded, well aware of the contents of the rucksack, and carefully hung it in her shoulder. At that time, Changing Star had already reached the lowest branches of the great tree. Not wasting any time, she moved Toespot above her companions, summoned the golden rope and threw one OFITS ends down. Catching the rope, Sunny quickly tied a loop and handed it to Cassie. You goop first. The blind girl hesitated for a moment, then accepted it. Just as he was about to put her foot inside the loop, Sunny suddenly stopped her. Wait, summon your staff. The wooden staff that Cassie used to walk was actually a magical item capable of summoning strong winds. In their travels, they rarely had a cause to use it, but now it could come in handy. Surprised and unsure of the reason, she nevertheless did as Shahad asked, summoning the memory from her sea of soul. The wooden staff appeared in her hand. Sunny lightly hugged the blind girl from behind and turned her body, guiding the hand holding the staff in the necessary direction. Then, he said, now summon the wind. In the next moment, a strong gale rose around them, blasting fallen leaves and ash and sand into the air. Instantly, a large portion of the island surface was stripped bare. More sand was revealed beneath. Meanwhile, the shadow was racing against the carapace demon. The massive creature was already halfway up the hill, moving with the speed of a rushing train. The nimble shadow, however, was even faster. It had already overtaken the behemoth and was now flying forward, hurrying to return to its master. Good, now go. Sunny helped Cassie put her foot into the loop and stepped back, watching as Neffis pulled the rope up. She was going as fast as he could, which was really fast by human standards. But was it fast enough? Sweating, he counted seconds and waited. His life now depended on whether or not the rope would return before the demon arrives. Every moment felt like an eternity. He could already hear the distant, but quickly approaching sound of the carapace demon-shaped towering legs stomping furiously through the sand. Finally, Cassie was at the level of the giant tree's lower branches. Neffis helped her step out of the loop and settle on the wide surface of the branch, then threw the rope down again. The demon was approaching the tree, still hidden from sight by its massive trunk. The shadow slipped beneath Sunny's feet and wrapped itself around his body. Catching the rope, Sunny practically flew up, climbing with incredible, adrenaline-fueled speed. Landing on the branch beside the girls, he quickly turned around and tried to pull the rope up. The monster could not notice the golden shine of it, otherwise, Edel would have been for nothing. But there was less than a second left. Oh no, Sunny thought, his heart skipping a beat. But then Neffis simply dismissed the memory, making the golden rope disappear into thin air. The three of them crouched, hiding from sight, and held their breaths. A moment later, the furious mass of spikes and polished metal appeared beneath them. The carapace demon abruptly stopped, gazing around with his burning scarlet eyes. His pincers clicked, as if thirsty to tear flesh apart. The terrifying scythes were raised into the air, ready to slash and sever. But there was nothing to kill underneath the great tree. The demon lingered, looking right and left. Then he raised his head and looked up. Thankfully, the branch the three sleepers were hiding on was very wide, more than enough to hide them from his sight. They remained motionless and silent, afraid to produce even the smallest of sounds. After a while, the behemoth finally lowered his gaze and carefully observed the ground, looking for the traces of possible intruders. However, the ground was clean and bare, all signs of their passage erased by Sunny with the help of Cassie's staff in advance. Not finding anything, the carapace demon had no choice but to walk away, moving on to explore other parts of the island. Sunny was finally able to exhale. Some distance away, the demon reached the edges of the area affected by the magical gale. There, he finally found two sets of footprints, one left behind by Neffis, the other one by Sunny. With an angry roar that sounded like the clamor of offering metal, the giant creature rushed down the slope of the ashen barrow, following the footprints to the wasteland beneath. However, the grey desert was desolate and empty, with no living creature in sight. It was colored crimson by the setting sun. At that moment, the ground shook slightly, and a thunderous rumble resounded throughout the labyrinth, bringing with it chilling wind and the smell of salt. The dark sea was returning. Throwing one last hateful gaze toward the wasteland, the carapace demon turned around ASLOWLY headed back to the top of his barrow. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 68-68, Beacon of Death. 1542 words. Sunny, Neffis and Cassie sat on a branch of the great tree, waiting for the sun to set. The branch was wide enough to accommodate twice as many people, so they weren't worried about being spotted from the ground. Still, they remained silent and motionless, wary of the giant monster that sometimes appeared beneath their hiding place. The sound of his footsteps sent shivers through the tense bodies of the three sleepers. Not once since coming to the Forgotten Shore had Sunny hoped for the night to come faster. But there was a first time for everything. They could only proceed with the next step of the plan after darkness had fallen, so there was nothing to do now but wait. Sitting with his back against Neff and Cassie, Sunny stared into the distance and tried not to think about anything. Obsessing over past mistakes and future risks was only going to dampen his resolve. And it was already in short supply. Meeting a setback so early into the plan really threw Sunny off his game. Hesto couldn't recover from the sudden loss of the precious echo. Of course, Heck knew beforehand that many things could go wrong. In fact, he had even warned the girls that there were too many unpredictable elements, and thus it was impossible to reliably predict their chances of success. Nevertheless, he had not expected Tallis, the strongest member of their group, at the very beginning. The first stage of the plan was supposed to be the safest. Things to come were going to be much more dangerous. Sunny looked at the darkening skies, barely visible through the thick canopy of the great tree's crown, and listened to the noise of the rising sea. In the dim twilight, Cassie shifted a little and then gently squeezed his hand. Her warm touch made Sunny tense up, but then, realizing that the blind girl was just trying to console him, hollowed himself to relax. Stupid. What, Amy? A kid. Holding hands will not solve anything. But, despite these grumbling thoughts, Sunny reluctantly realized that he'd feel a bit reassured, with knowledgeable reason at all. Maybe they were going to pull this off after all. If this was their will, who dared to stop them? Soon, the night descended, drowning the world in absolute darkness. The Ashen Barrow had become an island in the black, undulating void of the dark sea. The branches of the great tree swayed gently in the darkness, their vibrant scarlet leaves now indistinguishable from the obsidian surface of the wood. The leaves whispered and rustled, creating a calming melody in the threatening murmur of the surging waves. Sunny sighed, knowing that the moment of truth was approaching. He was sure of his plan, as far as it was possible to observe anything in this cursed place. But Helso knew all the risks and all the things that could go wrong. At the end of it all, they were still tossing a coin, hoping that its fall was not going to spell their doom. Heffelneff's position shift. She turned her head and glanced in his direction, a calm expression on her face. Today, her inexplicable ability to remain composed in any situation, no matter how dire, was especially frustrating. Even though Changing Star could not see anything in the pitch-black darkness of the starless void, she knew that he would notice her questioning look. Sunny closed his eyes, then opened them again and slowly exhaled. Let's begin. The three of them moved, performing Airhair's set of motions. Cassie carefully shifted to the side, giving Sunny and Neffy space to do what needed to be done. Sunny gently placed the seaweed rucksack between himself and Neff, then opened it. His motions were slow and cautious. Inside the rucksack, two large clay containers lay surrounded by several layers of soft seaweed fiber. These jars were made by Sunny himself, and as it were not particularly sturdy. After all, Hue a centaur craftsman, all his knowledge about pottery was received in a single day of listening to teacher Julius's rants about the importance of clay in the development of human civilization. Still, he at least remembered the basics. Inside the jars, all the oil they had gathered from the centipede monsters splashed around, making Sunny's heartbeat unsteady. A centipede monster had two sacs in its body, each containing a different oily substance. When mixed, these substances produced an incredibly corrosive, deadly oil that could eat through a scavenger's carapace in seconds. It was also highly flammable. The jars contained the two components of the centipede oil. If they were to break during their run to the great tree, allowing the components to mix, well, there was a reason why the rucksack was entrusted to Neffy's while Sunny carried Cassie despite his inferior physical endurance. The centipede oil was the centerpiece of his plan. Placing the clay jars on the branch, Sunny took out one last thing from the rucksack. It was a makeshift torch made out of bone and, yeah, more seaweed. Traditionally, torches were supposed to be made out of wood, but on the Forbidden Shore, bones were much more easily found than sticks. In the darkness, he found Neff's cool hand, took it into his own and then placed the torch on her open palm. At that moment, Sunny couldn't help but remember the other times Changing Star hands had touched his body. The first time was when he was dying, his chest crushed by the carapace centurion's bone scythe. The other time was on the day he handed her the Starlight Legion armor and learned about her cruel flaw. Both days were very memorable, although for different reasons. He had a feeling that this day was also going to be forever etched in his memory, provided they lived to see the morning. Sunny deeply inhaled. I'm ready. Neffy's nodded and then rose to her feet. Standing tall, she grasped the torch and closed her eyes, asked how praying. Clad in white armor, with her silver hair dancing in the wind, she looked like a beautiful, solemn angel. Then, white radiance ignited beneath her eyelids. In the next moment, bright fire burst from beneath her hands, igniting the top of the torch. Changing Star opened her eyes, extinguishing the light shining in them, and raised the torch high above her head. In the lightless world, this single small flame looked like a lonely star drowning in the sea of darkness. Simultaneously, Sunny stepped to the edge of the branch, inhaled deeply, and screamed at the top of his lungs. Hey, asshole, come get me if you dare. Then, all hell broke loose. Attracted by the sudden burst of light and Sunny's belligerent cries, the carapace demon appeared out of nowhere in a storm offry. Its towering legs tore through the ashen sand, throwing clouds off into the air. Two scarlet eyes immediately focused on the shouting human, sending a nervous shiver through Sunny's legs. Yeah, right here, you pile of scrap. Come and get it, fat lobster. This is me island now, he shouted, pretending to not be scared out of his wits. The demon dashed toward him. This behemoth was Astal Asa House, but still not tall enough to reach the branches of the great tree with his scythes. So, for the moment, Sunny was still safe. He was pretty sure that this wouldn't be the case for long, but it was enough time to bring the plan to fruition. I've Edison miss. Just as Carapace Demon was about to appear right beneath the branch Sunny was standing on, Head took a deep breath, aimed, and tossed both of the jars down. The creature reacted with lightning speed, slicing both jars into pieces with his horrible scythes. However, it was of nous. The oily liquids contained inside still rained on its carapace and adherent, followed by a scattering of clay shards. If anything, it only made the surface of the impact larger, covering most of the demon's metal carapace in a layer of liquid. The two components mixed, producing the deadly corrosive oil, which then burned into the lustrous armor. Sunny held his breath. However, the centipede monster's oil, which was capable of destroying the unbreakable chitin of both scavengers and centurions, turned out to be completely ineffective against the strange alloy covering the carapace demon's body. It didn't even leave a scratch on it. Sunny's face darkened. That's. Nephi silently appeared by his side, raising an arm. Single quote. Just as I expected. Luckily, Sunny did not put a lot of value on the oil's corrosive qualities to begin with. He needed the oil for its other quality, its flammability. Guided by the loud sounds produced by the massive monster, Nephis moved and threw the torch down with a powerful swing off her arm. Spinning, the torch streaked through the air like a meteor and landed right in the middle of the demon's carapace. In the next second, the giant creature was engulfed in flames. Sunny did not really expect the fire-tobable to damage the demon. He was sure that the behemoth could withstand much more than just simple heat. But now, covered in the burning oil, the carapace demon shined brightly in the pitch-black night of the Forgotten Shore. He had turned into a fury beacon, calling all the monsters of the cursed dark sea to come crawling from its black depths. Share to your friends. 42. Shares. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 69 to 69. The Guest. 1,575 words. The giant demon was engulfed in flames, shining like a bright beacon in the hungry darkness of the night. His polished armor blazed with reflected light, sending radiant glints in all directions. Drops of burning oil were falling to the ground, flaring upasti hit the ashen sand. For a second, it seemed asked how time had stopped. Sunny was staring at the incandescent glow of the fire, his eyes wide, almost failing to believe that they had actually pulled this insanity off. Nephis was frozen by his side, her hand still outstretched after the throw. But they really did, they pulled it off. Sunny never seriously considered facing the carapace demon in an honest battle. If a battle between a giant death machine and 3 powerless humans could even be called honest. However, their lacking strength did not mean that they could not murder the evil creature. They just had to be smart about how to do it. For example, they could find something stronger to do dirty work for them. Thatsy he had concocted a plan to sneak onto the ashen barrow, wait for the night to come, light the behemoth aflame and watch it be torn apart by the terrifying monsters of the dark sea. And now they were halfway to making that plan a reality. Of course, the most dangerous part was yet to come. They still had to survive the attack of the creatures of the Blackwater themselves. And before that, the carapace demon roared with fury, making Sunny feel like his ears were going to bolt. The roar sounded like a deafening cacophony of frosted metal being torn apart by giant claws. 2 scarlet eyes shone through the conflagration of flames, piercing the young man with a concentrated beam of murderous hatred. Before that, they had to last until the sea monsters arrived. The infuriated demon was out for their blood, and no one knew how much time it would take for the dark sea creatures to appear on the ashen barrow. Sunny was scared that the demon was capable of performing ranged attacks. If not, he might be able to climb the tree to get to them, or try to kill them in a way that they had not even considered. In the worst-case scenario, they would have to endure his rage for quite a while. Looking into the Johnshotful eyes, he sensed that the creature was thinking in the same direction. When the demon glanced in the direction of the great tree's obsidian trunk, Sunny's heart suddenly skipped a bit. However, in the end, cold rationality won over seething rage in the carapace demon's mind. Instead of wasting time trying to get to the 3 tiny humans, he suddenly rolled on the ground, hoping to douse the sand to douse the flames dancing on his carapace. The whole island shook, almost throwing Sunny off the branch. Crap, why did the bastard have to be so smart? For a moment, Sunny entertained the idea that the demon was actually going to succeed in extinguishing the fire before the dwellers of the depths had noticed it. But he didn't have to worry. Suddenly, Nephis turned to face the dark surface of the sea. Her face paled slightly. Sunny was a second late to react, but almost instantly, Hedu felt a strange change in the world around them. It was hard to describe with words. The rustle of the scarlet leaves suddenly felt quieter, the sound of the waves crashing against the shores of the ashen island louder. It was asked how some invisible pressure descended on the world, making everything feel slightly different. Then, the air became colder, and a wall of thick fog appeared above the dark waters. The carapace demon had also noticed this change. He stopped trying to douse the flames and rose from the sand, the oil still burning on his carapace. Not paying any attention anymore, the demon turned to the sea, a sense of grim resignation radiating from his posture. Then, it was replaced by dark resolve and frenzied bloodlust. The fog slowly moved, crawling onto the island. Sunny felt shivers run down his spine, realizing that it was flowing against the wind. The sound of waves was now muffled and changed, almost imperceptibly so. And there, in the fog, something was moving. He could almost make out a figure. It was. Suddenly, Cassie's small palm covered his eyes. With her voice trembling with tension, she whispered, "Don't look. No matter what happens, don't open your eyes." Sunny froze, obediently shutting his eyes. A cold sense of fright wrapped itself around his heart. He had never heard the blind girl's voice sound like this before, not even when she was recalling her terrifying visions. Cassie slowly removed her hand. Blinded, he could only rely on his hearing. At least that was what he thought until the cold fog touched his skin. Then, in the muffled silence, he heard Cassie's voice again. Only this time, it was distorted and coming from the wrong direction. "Don't look, don't look, don't look." Sunny gulped, feeling his hair stand on end. The sound of the blind girl's distorted voice echoed in the fog, surrounding him from all sides. Instead of growing quieter, it was becoming louder, overlapping over itself. "Don't look, don't look, don't look, don't look." Then, it grew even louder still and turned into a cacophony of screams, crashing into Sunny like a wave, sounding nothing like what human vocal cords could ever produce. "Don't look, don't look, don't look, don't." Sunny stood paralyzed, stunned by the onslaught of fine human shrieks. All he could do was try not to fall to his knees. And then, when his resilience was almost broken, everything suddenly stopped. The abrupt silence enveloped the world, making him exhale with relief. It was over. A few seconds later, Cassie whispered into his ear, "Open your eyes." After hearing the clear sound of her voice, Sunny was about to told. Then he stopped. Her voice did not sound terrifying and distorted. It was just as usual, sweet and melodic. It even came from the right direction. But something about it was wrong. What? Hellinger, keeping his eyes closed. Why was it so calm? Why didn't he feel the warmth of her breath as he leaned close to whisper into his ear? And how could she lean? If he was taller? Sunny froze, afraid to even breathe. Cassie's clear, familiar voice repeated. Open your eyes, open. Then, mere centimeters away, it exploded with cold, malevolent authority. Open your eyes, but he didn't. A second passed, then another, then one more. Each of them felt like an eternity. Sunny trembled, practically feeling his body aging. Finally, the voice returned. But this time, it felt asked how it was further away, withdrawing. No matter, no matter. Soon, he was able to hear the rustling of leaves and the sound of waves again. Heckled also hear Cassie and Neff breathing ruggedly beside him. It seemed that they were also assaulted by the terrifying mimic. And also, somewhere beneath them, the carapace demon roared and hit his sides against each other. The loud clamor of steel resounded beneath the great tree, sending an almost palpable wave in all directions. This wave seemed to expel the unnatural fog, creating an enormous sphere of clean air. Sunny still kept his eyes shut. In the next moment, the whole island trembled as demon clashed with the unknown horror that had been hiding in the fog. Something shattered with a deafening thunder, and the ground shook again, causing the branches of the great tree to sway. With his hands trembling, Sunny outstretched them and grabbed onto his companions, drawing them close. Holding each other, they listened to the sounds of the furious battle and waited. An eternity later, the fight between the carapace demon and the guest from the depths was over. Silence had returned to the Ashen Barrow once again. Sunny had long ago lost the track of time and grew desensitized to the tremors running through the great tree each time the two monsters clashed. Sudden stillness gave him a start. With a slight shudder, he turned his head and listened, trying to discern what was happening. In the quiet aftermath of the terrible battle, Neffis hesitated and then said in a spy voice. "We can open our eyes now." Sunny lingered before following her advice. He opened his eyes and blinked a couple of times, his vision slowly returning. The pale light of dawn was creeping from the east, enveloping the island in the dim twilight. Beneath them, the surface of the island was torn apart and upturned, almost unrecognizable. It was asked how the Ashen Barrow was pummeled by several rounds of heavy artillery fire. And on that surface, damn it, the carapace demon was slowly limping back from the edges of the island, leaving a trail of officer blood behind. He was heavily wounded in an adorable shape, with several limbs missing and a spiderweb of cracks covering his once pristine carapace. 2 of his arms were gone, leaving him with a single scythe and a single pincer. Most of his rear legs were either broken or severed, forcing the behemoth to walk in a strange, unsteady gait. However, he was still alive. More than that, none of the armor plates covering his vital organs were seriously damaged, his metal shell still strong and impenetrable. Sunny clenched his fists and glanced at Neff, a dark expression on his face. What Dodo? Changing Star looked down. There was a cold glint in her calm, gray eyes. Stretching her arm to the side, she summoned her sword and said. Finish him off. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 70-70, Judgment of the Blade. 1,521 words. Sunny looked at the wounded demon, a grim look of resolve on his face. At this point, there was no reason to argue. They had no other choice but to face the guardian of the island themselves. Sunny's bag of tricks was all empty anyway. In the end, their fates were still going to be decided by sharp blades. Someone was going to get killed, and someone was going to be the killer. How are we going to deal with his armor? Neffis weighed the sword in her hand and glanced down. I will break through the armor. Can you create an opening? Sunny nodded, not wasting time on unnecessary questions. If Changing Star was certain of her ability to cut through the demon's carapace, he had no reason to doubt it. Creating an opening, that was not going to be easy. Even though the monster had suffered terrible injuries, he was still a force to be reckoned with. His size alone was going to pose difficulties. They would have to bring the behemoth down to his knees before even thinking of carrying out any sort of an effective attack. And he was not just going to stand still under their assault, either. But what else was there to do? While Neffis was tying the golden rope to the branch, Sunny walked over to Cassie and lightly squeezed her shoulder. She tried to force a smile. I take it that the carapace demon is still alive. Despite the heavy, cold, dark feeling gripping his heart, Sunny tried to make his voice sound relaxed and carefree. Yeah, but just barely. Don't worry too much. This whole thing will be over in a time. One way or another, headed inwardly. Cassie's smile weakened. She was clearly not convinced by his clumsy attempt to reassure her. Sunny hesitated. Hey, have you ever eaten demon meat? The blind girl was clearly surprised by his question. What? No. Sunny grinned. How about a demon steak? I'm an excellent cook, I'll have you know. I think. Neff had sort of monopolized the preparation of food, so I had no chance to put all the knowledge from the wilderness survival course to practice. Teacher Julius had indeed spent a lot of time teaching him how to cook all kinds of seemingly inedible things, as well as meats of all sorts of nightmare creatures, in preparation for his journey into the dream realm. Here, hunger was as much of an enemy as fiercest of monsters. As soon as we get our hands on some demon meat, I'll make you a steak. It'll be the most delicious demon steak you had ever eaten, I promise. Finally, Ariel's smile appeared on Cassie's face. She gave him a courteous nod. All right, that's a promise then. Meanwhile, Neffis was done with the rope. She threw it down without hesitation and glanced at them. Are you ready? Sunny sighed and closed his eyes for a second, feeling the strength of his body being enhanced by the shadow. Yes, let's do this. As soon as their feet touched the ground, Sunny felt a heavy gaze burning a hole in his chest. Glancing up, he saw the crippled carapace demon staring right at them, a dark glint shining in his one remaining eye. The other one was gone, leaving only a bleeding black gap behind. At this distance, the damage dealt to the demon's body seemed even more debilitating. Its carapace was fractured in several places and covered in cracks, each seeping with azure blood. Sadly, none of the cracks were near the vital organs. His horns were shattered, as was one of his front legs, in addition to several rear ones that were either broken or torn off completely. The stumps of his 2 severed arms were pressed tight against his torso to stem the heavy bleeding. The other 2 were hanging to the ground, almost brushing against the ashen sand. The giant monster looked broken and tired. However, it was still terrifying, perhaps even more so than before. Because, despite the horrible wounds, his gaze was still firm and full of evil intelligence. It was still radiating madness and bloodlust, which was now concentrated on Sunny and Neffis, the architects of his sorry state. The first beams of the rising sun shone on the spikes covering the demon's lustrous carapace, painting them in shades of burning crimson. Sunny summoned the azure blade and glanced at Nephis. Be careful, Hes lightning fast. He was the only one who had seen the terrible creature in action. Asik, only Heck knew how dangerous the demon really was. Nephis nodded, not taking her eyes off the enemy, and stepped forward. The two of them walked toward the waiting carapace demon. Sunny was slightly ahead and aiming to circle the behemoth from the right, the side where the demon had both his last remaining scythe and eye. Changing Star was a step or two behind him, aiming to circle the creature from the left, the side where his pincer arm was slowly rising into the air. In this battle, Sunny's role was to take the brunt of the enemy's attacks, letting his partner deal the lethal blow when the time was right. Through the tacit understanding that they had developed through surviving dozens of life or death situations, the two of them were able to cooperate without speaking a single word, fighting almost alone. This was their main advantage. As they were closing in, Sunny felt a slight shift in the demon's posture. Instantly, Heck knew that hell was about to break loose. He had warned Nephis about the speed of their enemy, but also had to deal with it himself. Sunny knew that he was much slower than the giant creature, but he still had to find a way to dodge the massive, terrifying scythe. That wasn't as bad as it seemed. Speed wasn't everything in a fight. Take, for example, Changing Starry's training fight against the proud scion of the Han Lik clan. Castor possessed an aspect ability that made him 10 times faster than the silver-haired girl, at least. However, in the end, he only won by a hair's breadth. Nephis had almost smashed his face with an unexpected elbow strike. She had been able to catch Castor unaware not because of her fast reaction. With that big difference between their speeds, no amount of reaction could have helped her. Instead, she was able to predict and manipulate the opponent's attacks, starting the strike even before Castor himself knew that he was going to end up in the path of her elbow. She was in control of the battlefield. And now, they had to repeat that feat against the ancient demon of the Forgotten Shore. Luckily, his speed advantage was not nearly as insane as Castor's. Almost simultaneously, Sunny and Nephis lunged forward, attacking the behemoth from different sides. Helso moved, ready to tear them apart. Both his pincer and his scythe rose into the air. Sunny was running as fast as could, the azure blade outstretched behind him. A fire of cold resolve was burning in his heart. He was ready to live or die by his blade. However, in the next moment, his leg seemed to slip in the sand, and Ash's eyes opened wide. Sunny stumbled. Not wasting the opportunity, the carapace demon attacked. The terrifying scythe tore through the air, aiming to cut the helpless human in half. But if it only sand, Sunny, who had feigned his loss of balance to bait the demon's strike, easily avoided the deadly blade by jumping to the side at the last second. He wasn't quite at the level where he could predict every move of the enemy. Instead, manipulating the enemy into performing a predictable attack was easier. After all, deceit and manipulation were his forte. Temporarily safe from the threat of the scythe, Sunny dashed toward the demon's ults. At the same time, Nephis had managed to avoid the massive pincer and was closing in on them, too. They reached their goals almost simultaneously, one from the right, the other from the left. Sunny slashed with the azure blade, feeling it hit the polished armor and bounced back without leaving even a slight scratch on it. Dull pain radiated through his hands. Once the other side of the behemoth's massive body, Nephis achieved more success. She had attacked the already injured front leg of the monster, cutting deep into his flesh through the wide crack in the metal plate. Severely damaged, the leg wasn't able to support the weight of the giant creature anymore. It buckled, sending the demon reeling. At this point, a scavenger or a centurion would have lost their balance and fallen to the ground. However, the carapace demon was too smart and experienced. He compensated for the loss of another leg by shifting his body weight to the opposite side and thrusting his side into the ground to remain stable. Damn it, Sunny had really hoped that the bastard would fall down, because then he wouldn't have had Toto what he was about to next. But now there was no other choice. Cursing inwardly, Sunny briefly looked up at the massive body of the giant demon. Heavens only knew how much that thing weighed. Then, he held his breath and ducked right beneath the carapace demon's steel abdomen. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads, redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 71 to 71. One small mistake. 1,600 words. With the carapace demon using his deadly scythe to support the weight of his body, Sunny was temporarily safe from its sharp blade. Of course, the monster had other means of attack. Each one of his towering legs was like a siege ram, dangerous and capable of devastating destruction. But at the moment, his position was too precarious to lash out with them. Sunny had at least a second Toto whatever he wished to, with no risk involved. The only thing he had to avoid was going directly under the behemoth, thus putting himself in danger of being crushed to death by the demon's giant body. Coincidentally, that was exactly what he had Toto. Crap, crap, crap. Glancing up with massive armored creature, Sunny cursed and dashed forward. A moment later, he dove underneath the carapace demon, feeling the thick shadows swallow him whole. Instantly, Sunny was covered in cold sweat. There was nothing but polished metal and murderous intent above him now. All the monster had Toto turned the tiny human into a puddle of blood was tossed his body on the sand. Under the crushing weight, Sunny's organs would burst and his bones would turn to dust. There wouldn't be anything solid left of him at all, only a thin layer of bloody goo smeared across the ground. Not the best situation to find yourself in. With his nerves on the verge of melting, Sunny brandished his sword and rushed forward. His eyes were glued to the joints of carapace demon's ults. He was utterly focused, looking for the slightest movement, waiting for it. With no room for error, Sunny pushed every unnecessary thought and emotion into the farthest corner of his mind, not allowing dread, doubt and his tendency to overthink things to slow him down even by a fraction of a second. Time moved excruciatingly slowly. It felt as how hours had passed, but in reality, it was only a couple of moments. Sunny was only at the second pair of the giant monster's ults. It was then that he finally noticed the almost imperceptible change in the demon's posture. The tension in his joint changed slightly, indicating that the behemoth was about to move. This was the sign that Sunny was both hoping for and terrified of. Now, his survival was wholly dependent on whether or not he was fast enough. As soon as his eyes had registered the change in the creature's posture, Sunny pivoted on leg and dashed to the side, trying to get away from underneath the armored giant. A small cloud of sand was sent flying by his sudden turn, but the demon was incredibly fast. He threw his body down, determined to squash the odious invader like a bug. With inertia and the limits of his human body slowing Sunny down, he felt the metal surface of the carapace begin to fall down on his head long before reaching the safe zone. Death was approaching with abhorrent speed. One step, two, was he going to make it in time? The carapace demon fell to the ground with a thunderous crash, sending large clouds of sand into the air. The impact was so strong that the whole island trembled. The furious mass of falling metal and spikes missed Sunny by just a few centimeters. He flew from underneath the demon's body at the last possible moment by performing a desperate dive. Crashing into the sand, Sunny rolled away and jumped back to his feet, slightly disoriented by the shockwave of the giant's fall. I actually managed to survive. Sometimes, life was full of surprises. But, all jokes aside, he was not really astonished. His actions, while potentially fatal, had been deliberate and calculated. He was not in the habit of putting his life at risk without being sure that there would be at least a moderate chance of making it out alive. His actions were also always purposeful and pursued a specific goal. In this case, it was to bring the carapace demon down. Only by forcing the giant creature down to the ground, in reach of their blades, could they hope to kill it. In that sense, this dangerous gamble ended in resounding success. The bastard was now lying on his abdomen, his carapace and humanoid torso, where all the vital organs were situated, well in the changing star's attack range. Now Sunny just had to create an opening for her to deal the fatal blow, although he still had no idea about how she was planning to be past the impenetrable barrier of the demon's armor. However, creating that opening was not going to be a trivial task. Despite the fact that the monster's mobility was now severely reduced, the distance between him and the two sleepers was also much smaller, which made dodging his attacks that much harder. Sunny was about to experience that hardship for himself. He was barely back on his feet when the terrifying scythe flashed through the air, threatening to slice his body in half. Sunny had no idea how Nefis was doing on the other side of the creature's enormous body against the pincer, but dealing with the scythe was almost beyond his abilities. The burning eye of the demon that followed his every move was not helping the situation at all. With very little time to react, Sunny did the only thing he could think of. He jumped Ashkid and pulled his legs up to his chest, performing a very awkward forward somersault. Because of the number of shadow fragments he had consumed and the physical enhancement brought by the shadow, the height of his jump was nothing short of impressive by human standards. The scythe's blade whistled beneath Sunny, so close that he could feel the wind brushing against his face. Landing on the ground, head edged forward, Sunny knew that the scythe would come back, but he had a second or two to change his position, getting in front of the behemoth. He had to make the giant creature forget about Nefis completely and concentrate fully on dealing with him, and him alone. Toto that, he had to get in range of both the scythe and the pincer. What a lovely task. Feeling that his time was running out, Sunny spun around and raised the azure blade. Just as thought, the carapace demon was already bringing the scythe down at them again, this time in a ruthless horizontal thrust. The sharp tip of the scythe was flying through the air, aimed at his chest. However, he had slightly underestimated the demon's reaction time. As a result, there was already no time to dodge. One small mistake was the difference between life and death on the forgotten shore. The scene of their first fight against a carapace centurion flashed in Sunny's mind. The situation was eerily similar to this one, with the inescapable doom approaching him at the speed of lightning, too swift and close to be avoided. Brought by the blade of a carapace creature's scythe. But Sunny wasn't the same as was before. Since that fateful battle, he had spent every day training, gaining experience and gathering power. He had fought his way through this hell, paying a price of blood for every step. He wasn't that easy to kill anymore. Instead of soft flesh, the scythe was met by the hard steel of the azure blade. Not only did Sunny block the blow, he even managed to angle the sword in a way that would deflect most of the impact instead of absorbing the full force of it. One of his hands was placed on the hilt, the other gripped the tip of the blade with enough strength to prevent the edge from cutting his fingers off. The residual force was still enough to send him flying back, but it was not enough to break the bones in his hands. Not with the shadow enhancing the resilience of his body. The azure blade, however, was not as lucky. With a sorrowful ring, the blade shattered, breaking off near the cross guard. Beautiful shards of blue steel fell to the ground. Sunny gritted his teeth, knowing what would happen next. The spell spoke, announcing the destruction of his trusty sword. Your memory has been. He didn't get to hear the rest of the sentence, because, in the next moment, his body collided with the ground. Sunny bounced a couple of times, feeling flashes of pain radiating through his bones, rolled, and finally came to a stop. He was comparatively fine. Standing up, Sunny stumbled and barely managed to remain on his feet. He glanced around and noticed that the trunk of the great tree was not that far away. 24 meters away, the carapace demon was slowly turning his head, planning to concentrate his murderous rage on Nefis. This was the exact opposite of what Sunny had to achieve. He had to attract the monster's attention somehow. But what could he do? As remains of the azure blade began to shine with soft light in his hand, ready to disintegrate into a rain of sparks, Sunny raised his hand and threw the broken sword with as much force as could gather. However, he didn't throw ITATTHE demon. Instead, he threw ITATTHE miraculous tree, asked how trying to harm it. Not far away, the demon suddenly froze, even if only for a second. His scarlet eye followed the shining memory as it flew through the air, approaching the trunk of the great tree. Then the broken sword fell apart, turning into a shower of white sparks, which then disappeared without a trace. None of them even touched the obsidian bark. However, the azure blade had already fulfilled its purpose. It distracted the giant for a few precious moments. For Changing Star, that was more than enough. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 72-72, Demon Slayers. 1,275 words. As soon as Carapace Demon froze, distracted by the faint threat to the great tree, Nefis lunged forward. There was no hesitation, no doubt, not even the slightest pause between the moment her enemy had lowered his defenses and her reckless attack. Just like Sunny had been utterly focused on observing the monster's movements before, she had been watching and waiting for this exact moment since the beginning of the battle. Changing Star knew that, when the opportunity presents itself, it will only last for a second. Even that single second almost cost Sunny his life. Nefis wasn't going to oust it. Her graceful figure flew through the air like an arrow released from a powerful bow, almost leaving after images behind. The silver blade off her long sword glimmered, reflecting the light of dawn. The black and white armor seemed to turn into a blur. She was going all in, rushing at the enemy without leaving herself even the slightest chance to retreat. Things were happening too fast for Sunny to form a coherent thought. Heckled only watch, time slowing down Toakral, a storm of emotions raging in his mind. The demon reacted almost immediately, recognizing the threat. But, almost, didn't count on a battlefield. A moment of distraction was all it took to tell us everything. That one mistake, no matter how small, had been enough to seal his fate. If Nephis was really capable of breaking through the creature's indestructible carapace, that is. Otherwise, it was all for nothing, and they would beta one's dying, instead. The fearsome giant moved his scythe, trying to slice her apart. The pincer flashed from the other side, threatening to crush her body into pulp. But he was a fraction of a second too late. Changing Star was just a tiny bit faster. As he ran, something changed about the cadence of her steps. Sunny couldn't see her face behind the visor of her helmet, but Ife could. He would see a grimace of agony contorting Neff's pale face. In the next moment, a soft white radiance ignited beneath the skin of her hands. However, this time, it didn't stay there. Instead, the white flame flowed outward, into the hilt of the silver sword, and then into its blade. The sword suddenly turned into a sharp radiant edge, burning with incandescent white light. It shined so brightly that Sunny felt the desire to close his eyes. However, the radiance wasn't soft and warm anymore. Instead, it seemed Toba capable of reducing anything it touched to ash and sharp enough to cut the fabric of the world itself. Perhaps, it was even sharp enough to cut the strings off it. Sunny remembered how Nephis had described her aspect ability, it conveys for healing. Back then, he had suspected that this phrase of hers implied that there was more to it. He even marveled at how precious and rare such an ability would be. It seemed asked how he was right. Changing Star's miraculous flame was capable of both healing and destroying. It possessed an enhancing effect similar to his own shadow control, at least when applied to weapons. Who knew what else it could do? An incredible ability indeed. Looking back, Ho understood that Nephis had not tortured herself in vain. All the times she pretended to meditate while enduring the excruciating agony of her flaw in secret were meant to make this moment possible. To give her enough fortitude to oust this ability in battle without passing out from the pain. She succeeded. The question was, would that be no? Was her sword strong enough to break the mighty carapace of the awakened demon? After all, no matter how incredible the ability, it was still powered by a weak dormant soul core of a lowly sleeper. They were about to find out. A few steps away from the carapace demon's towering torso, Nephis bent her legs and jumped, soaring high into the air. Her sword flashed forward in a vicious thrust, so fast that, for a moment, it looked like a beam of pure white sunlight. Then, it collided with the strange alloy of the giant's lustrous armor, right at the spot where his heart was supposed to be. Of course, back when they were hiding in the dead Leviathan's empty spine, Cassie had told them about her vision. In that vision, she saw the carapace demon being attacked by a terrible creature of the deep dark sea. In the aftermath of the battle, the demon was severely wounded and on the verge of dying. The most horrible wound was on his chest, where the armor was torn apart and shattered, revealing the monster's beating heart. With time, all his injuries had healed, except for this one. While the carapace of the demon seemed to have recovered, in truth, it was never fully restored. In this one spot, the armor was secretly weakened, and it was exactly to that spot that Nephis had delivered her blow. It didn't matter whether her radiant sword was really capable of breaking through the impregnable armor of the awakened creature, because she attacked the only weak spot on his body, the place where his armor had already been broken. With a flash of white light, the incandescent sword pierced through the metal of the demon's carapace and plunged into his body, unleashing a fury of fire inside the adamantine shell. It seemed asked how the giant was suddenly illuminated from within, with beams of light shining through the cracks in his armor. For a moment, the surreal sight was burned into Sunny's mind. Then, Changing Star's sword had reached the carapace demon's heart and sliced it apart, incinerating everything around it and making the azure blood of the fearsome creature boil and evaporate. Sunny's legs buckled, and he gracelessly fell on his ass. Wah, what did it? The demon staggered, his arm slowly rose, asked how trying to pull Nephis into a final embrace. But then, Ash's body twitched, they fell to the ground. Neph landed in the sand and jumped back, ready to defend herself. But there was no need. The proud guardian of the Ashen Barrow was dying. The scarlet light in his one remaining eye was dimming, any semblance of intelligence quickly disappearing from his gaze. The demon heavily slumped, all remnants of strength abandoning his mighty body. Turning his head with incredible effort, He cast one last look on the great tree. Then, his gaze stopped on Sunny. There was no fury or madness in that gaze anymore. Only some strange, calm, inexplicable emotion. It almost felt like relief. Before Sunny could discern the meaning of that emotion, the last glimmer of light was gone from the eye of the carapace demon. His head rolled back and fell. They won. In front of the giant body, Nephis had dismissed her helmet. Behind it, her face was pale and tired, her hair sticking to it in a sweaty mess. The afterglow of the white radiance was already extinguished, leaving her eyes gray once again. Changing Star kneeled, then lay down on her back, too exhausted to move. The whole fight lasted less than a minute, but it took everything out of both of them. Sunny followed Neff's example and lay on the ground, trying to catch his breath. They actually won. He couldn't quite believe it. I want to sleep for a week. Remembering that Cassie was still waiting in the branches of the great tree, not knowing who lived and who died, Sunny sighed. A few moments later, he deeply inhaled. Then, straining his vocal cords, He screamed at the top of his lungs. In the silence of the morning, in the center of the tall hill covered with ash and sand, under the branches of a beautiful, giant tree, Astran's shout could be heard. One demon steak, coming right up. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 73-73, The Circle of Death. 1,505 words. A few minutes later, Sunny heard a noise coming from somewhere above. Looking in that direction, he noticed that Cassie was standing at the edge of the wide branch, gripping the golden rope in her hands. Before he could react, the blind girl was already climbing down. She was very cautious, but also quite nimble for someone without sight. He blinked. Is she crazy? That's dangerous. But he was worried for nothing. Cassie quickly reached the ground and let go of the rope, safe and sound. She then summoned her staff and took a hesitant step, trying to remember where his shout had come from. Sunny made his presence known and guided her by saying, I'm here. The blind girl turned her head in his direction and walked forward, carefully feeling the ground in front of her with the staff. Because of how uneven the surface of the island had become, it took her longer than usual to reach him. Just as he was about to walk past, Sunny spoke again. Hey, Saz. Cassie stopped and lowered her head with a surprised expression. Then, she asked, why are you lying on the ground? Hesmold weakly. Ah, it's very comfortable. Suddenly, the blind girl frowned and asked in a worried tone. Are you hurt? Sunny shook his head with a sigh. His sense of humor was not always appreciated. In fact, it had often landed him in hot water in the past. Just bruised all over. Nothing serious. I'm just really tired. That one was really intense. Since Cassie was still frowning, he thought for a moment and added. Nef I sal so fine. Shesh resting a bit further away. Finally, the delicate girl relaxed. Her face cleared, and she offered him a hesitant smile. You really killed that demon? Sunny cast a gaze at the giant corpse and closed his eyes. Yeah, Heshri dead. Both of them were silent for some time. Sunny was on the verge of falling asleep when Cassie carefully asked. So, you're just going to continue lying here? He opened his eyes and blinked, trying to remember what was going on. Oh, right, it's morning. There are things we have Toto. The last day was excruciatingly long and exhausting. They had to make preparations to execute the plan, race to the top of the hill, climb the great tree, hide themselves in its branches, risk their lives to set the demon on fire, not to mention all the stuff that happened after. All culminating in the short but terrifying battle against the creature itself. And yet, it was not time to rest yet. They had to take basic precautions, at least. Straining his exhausted body, Sunny stood up and offered Cassie his shoulder. After she placed her hand on it, he walked over to the carapace demon's corpse, stopping at the spot where Neffis was sprawled in the sand. She greeted them with a tired glance. Good morning. Out of habit, Changing Star tried to force a polite smile. However, today did not look very convincing. I give it 3.6 out often. Not great, not terrible. Soon, the three of them were sitting in a circle, passing around the glass bottle full of cold, refreshing water. Sunny was in the middle of describing their fight with the carapace demon. So Hago distracted for a few moments. That's when Neff attacked. She used her aspect ability to ignite her sword and struck at the weakened Pacho farmer on the demon chest, the one you told us about. Itriali was not as strong as rest of his carapace. Such sword went through and pierced the bastard's heart. Sunny noted that Cassie did not seem surprised at the mention of Changing Star's new trick. Either she knew all along because Neffis had told her, or she saw something in one of her visions. Regardless, he decided not to press the topic. The demon was already severely wounded from his fight with the thing from the sea, so it was enough to finish him off. A few seconds later, he was dead. Cassie shook her head in astonishment. That is, incredible. 2 sleepers killing an awakened demon. It thought that stuff like that only happens in webtoons. Neffis corrected her. 3 sleepers. Without your vision and advice, we wouldn't have been able to do anything. The blind girl lowered her face, a little embarrassed. Still, 2 or 3, it doesn't really change a lot, does it? Sunny looked from one girl to another, then finally turned to Cassie. You're right, it's not something one would expect to happen. But, anyway, I promised to cook demon meat for you after this is over, didn't I? Are you ready to witness my incredible culinary talent? Hesmold, already tasting the juicy, tender meat in his mouth. However, Cassie suddenly frowned, a hesitant expression appearing on her face. I didn't know about that. He raised his eyebrows. What? Why? She lingered before answering. Well, it just seems weird to eat the meat of an intelligent creature. Even IFITWAS evil. I didn't think about it before, but now, it just doesn't seem right, I guess. Sunny blinked. Actually, he did not think about it either. In retrospect, the idea of making steaks out of a creature whose intelligence was comparable to theirs did seem a little wrong. Even if that creature was a bloodthirsty demon who would have swallowed them whole without a second thought. It was just how things worked in the dream realm. Monsters devoured humans, and humans devoured monsters. It was the circle of life. Death. The circle of death. But the carapace demon was not only smart. He had his own thoughts and personality. Even though nightmare creatures were universally insane and obsessed with murder and destruction, just like he was, there were also other qualities to the ironclad giant. He was proud and fearless, even valiant. When fighting against the terrifying monsters of the Dark Sea, he did not hesitate to stand his ground, refusing to surrender. Cooking the meat of someone like that could indeed be considered strange. How come Teacher Julius did not educate me on the ethics of feeding your enemies? What an oversight. Misunderstanding Sunny Silence, Cassie blushed and said, sorry, I know it seems ridiculous, but that's just how I feel. You and Nefton have to do same. Sunny shook his head. No, you might be right. I understand, sort of. It's just that we didn't bring any supplies with us, so we won't be able to eat anything unless we go hunting. The blind girl sighed. Then, her face brightened and she said, what about the great tree's fruits? I bet they're delicious. Sunny looked at her in amazement. Are you serious? Cassie was visibly confused by his question. Yes. Why? He blinked a couple of times before answering. That tree is magnificent and pretty, but it's also very strange and suspicious. Why is it able to grow here when nothing else can? I'm pretty sure that it's the reason why all the coral around the Ashen Barrow is dead. Have you seen anything else capable of damaging the labyrinth itself? Sunny looked at Cassie, then at Nephis, trying to show how serious he was about this. In any case, it's too creepy. I didn't think that we should eat these fruits. Who knows what they'll do us? The blind girl smiled. You're being a little paranoid, didn't you think? A tree is a tree. Actually, I think it's a wonderful example of how life can prevail against all odds, even in this terrible place. I'm willing to bet that its fruits are perfectly fine. He stared at her, not knowing what to say. How could Cassie be so dismissive of his completely valid concern? That wasn't like her at all. Unpleasantly surprised, Sunny turned to Neff, hoping that she would support him. Changing Star thought things through before speaking. Then, she said in a measured voice. Sunny is right. There are too many strange things about that tree. Eating its fruits would be too risky. Finally, a voice of reason. He exhaled, relieved. However, his heart was still inexplicably gripped with worry. As Cassie sighed with disappointment, Changing Star turned to him and asked. The echo was destroyed. Sunny's face darkened. He was still pained by the loss of his loyal scavenger. Yeah, the demon acted faster than I had expected. He killed it before I could do anything. Neffis frowned. Too bad. Our speed will be severely reduced. Have you no heart, woman? At least pretend to besod. My poor echo is gone. His shadow shook its head, amazed at the childishness of its master. Sunny was also surprised by his reaction, considering that his own first thought after the echo had died was about how much money he wouldn't be able to make by selling it. Yeah, it's a pity. Changing Star gave him it and then asked, "You also lost your sword?" Sunny sighed and gritted his teeth. Yes, it shattered when it blocked the demon's scythe, which hurt even more than the death of his scavenger. Azure Blade was his first sword. He fought and trained with it for a long time. It was already like a part of him. And now it was gone. Nephi's raised AHAND. Well, you're in luck. I received a memory after killing the carapace demon. It's a weapon. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads, redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 74-74, Midnight Shard. 1052 words. Sunny's heart skipped a bit. Instantly, he forgot all about the Azure Blade. Yes, that sword held a certain sentimental value, but who the hell cares about sentimentality? It came from a carapace scavenger, which wasn't bad at all for his current rank. Few sleepers got Tawiled awakened weapons. But this new memory came from an actual awakened demon. A demon, that made it an awakened memory of the 3rd tier, 2 whole tiers above the Azure Blade. There were 7 tiers in total, corresponding to the 7 classes of nightmare creatures, from beasts to titans. Strictly speaking, a higher tier did not always mean that a memory will be more powerful, but generally, the more advanced a creature was, the more unique and formidable memories it left behind. Patsy the Puppeteer's Shroud, which came from an awakened tyrant and was thus considered Toby tier 5 awakened armor, was so precious. Please, be some. Sunny tried very hard to not let his excitement show on his face. Pretending to be nonchalant, he kept his voice even and said, "Really, that is good." Nephies took his hand, ruining all Sunny's attempts to appear calm, and closed her eyes. Hiding the startled expression on his face, Sunny felt a spark of energy travel from her body to his. It was just like that time he transferred the Starlight Legion armor to her, only in reverse. You have received a memory, Midnight Shard. Ha, cool name. He summoned the runes and impatiently searched for the description of his new weapon. Memory, Midnight Shard, memory rank, awakened, memory type, weapon, memory description, forged from the shard of a fallen star. This stalwart blade is firm and unyielding. It favors those who are willing to fight to the last drop of blood and knows no surrender. Interesting. Not wasting any time, Sunny summoned the Midnight Shard. Immediately, an elegant sword appeared in his hand. The sword looked a bit like the Azure Blade, but only in the sense that it was single-edged and had a long hilt suitable for 2 hands. However, this was where the similarities ended. For starters, its blade was much longer, somewhere between 70 and 80 centimeters, and slightly curved. It was forged out of the same bright, lustrous metal as Carapace Demon's armor. It was incredibly sharp. The hilt was made out of polished black wood, quite similar in appearance to the onyx branches of the great tree. The crossguard was round in shape and more pronounced than that of the Azure Blade, offering better support and protection to the wielder's hand. The sword had no decorations, no ornaments, no embellishments. It was simple and austere, like a true weapon designed for battle and battle alone. It seemed to radiate a cold, fearsome aura. As soon as Ash's hand touched the Midnight Shard, Sunny felt that this sword possessed an unbreakable will. Its blade was strong enough to withstand devastating blows without suffering any damage. With this sword in his hand, nothing would be able to leave Sunny unarmed again. More than that, there was a strange new sensation somewhere deep in his heart. When Sunny held the Midnight Shard, he could feel a subtle presence, asked how there was a deep well of power hiding inside of him, just beyond reach. He couldn't quite understand how to access that power yet, but it was certainly real. I guess I'll have to in its favor first. But how do I do it? I'll have to experiment later. Admiring his new weapon, Sunny looked at Nephis and said, "Even I know what type of sword this is. It's a katana, right?" She studied the Midnight Shard and then answered, "Technically, it's a taki. It's longer than a traditional katana and has a slightly different blade shape. But for quite similar. Itachi, well, it sounded nice anyway. And most of the principles he had learned with the Azure Blade could be applied to a sword of this type as well, since they shared the same foundation." The new acquisition wasn't quite enough to make Sunny forget about the loss of the echo, but his mood did improve significantly. He liked the Midnight Shard a lot. There was beauty in its simple, resolute design. It was understated and deadly, kind of like Sunny himself. It was a significant upgrade. Suddenly, a dark thought appeared in Sunny's mind. Glancing at Nephis, he cleared his throat and said after a bit of hesitation, "It's a very nice weapon. Tier 3, Nolus. Are you sure that you didn't want to keep it for yourself?" Changing Star was the one to deal the final blow to the Carapace demon, after all. By right, the memory belonged to her. But Sunny really hoped that she would refuse. Nephis shook her head. "I already have a sword. It suits me." Inwardly, Sunny sighed with relief. Good, he thought. Makes you wonder, though, if she is unwilling to exchange her longsword for a tier 3 weapon, then what is the tier of that silver sword offers? He didn't buy the idea that it simply suited Changing Star better even for a second. She had told him herself that the principle of using these types of swords was basically the same. Upgrading to the Midnight Shard and giving the old weapon to Sunny would not have caused her any problem. The only reason she would refuse it was that it would have been a downgrade, instead. Once again, He became curious about the exact circumstances of how Neff had gotten her true name. To receive his own, Sunny had to kill an awakened tyrant. Could it be possible that she had done the same? Or even, something more incredible? But he was too tired to tree and fish for information. They all were, afraid that the strange winged creature they had seen devouring a dead centurion would appear again, this time to claim the remains of the Carapace demon. The 3 sleepers relocated to far side of the island and hid behind the trunk of the great tree. Only when they were sure that nothing would be able to notice them from above did they finally allow the exhaustion to prevail and went to sleep. Sunny fell into dreamless darkness almost instantly, happy to finally be able to rest. However, this time something strange happened. He actually saw a dream. Strange, Sunny thought. This isn't supposed to happen in the dream realm, right? Then, there was no more time to think. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads, redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 75-75, Broken Dreams. 1763 words. Sunny woke up from the insistent sense of alarm coming from his shadow. Groggy and disoriented, he opened his eyes and sat up. What is wrong? He looked down at the shadow and saw it repeated ly pointing up with a tense expression on its, well, it didn't have a face. Heckle just tell that it was nervous. Trouble. Sunny looked up and saw nothing but the scarlet leaves of the great tree. The sky was hidden, but he could easily tell that the sun was still up. It seemed that he was asleep for just a few hours. There was no threat anywhere in sight. He frowned. What got you so spooked? The shadow just pointed up again, seemingly irritated by his stupidity. Sunny blinked a couple of times and addressed it again. High in the tree, higher, in the sky. Finally satisfied, the shadow crossed its arms. Something dangerous is above the island, that creepy raven thing again. He had to check, but why did he feel asked how he was forgetting something? Sunny scowled, trying to understand where this feeling of missing something important had come from. What was there to miss? He was asleep, then woke up and conversed with the shadow. Asleep. Suddenly, he remembered bits and pieces of a strange dream. At least it seemed like a dream, was it? People weren't supposed to dream in the dream realm. It was just how things worked. From what Heck knew, only Cassie seemed to be an exception from this rule. He didn't remember much about this supposed dream of his, with even the remaining fragments already fading from his memory. There was a woman grabbing him by the shoulders, an expression of horror and panic on her face. She was saying something, but Heck couldn't hear what. No, not a woman. It was Cassie. Yes, it was her, and the thing she was saying. Sunny strained his memory, trying to catch the pieces of the dream before they completely disappeared. Yeah, I think she was saying, Suddenly, he could clearly hear Cassie's frightened, tense voice as he was hurriedly telling him to remember something, repeating the same sentence over and over again in a begging tone. You have to remember, Sunny. 5, it's 5, remember, you have to remember, it's 5, what a strange dream. Sunny cast a glance at Cassie, who was sleeping peacefully near Neff, and shook his head in bewilderment. He was unsure if this memory of his was really a dream or some strange scene he had imagined right before falling asleep. With how the dream realm worked, he was leaning toward the latter possibility. Still, I better tell the girls when. He was distracted from this thought by the shadow, which waved its hands impatiently. Oh, right, there's a threat in the sky. Instantly, Sunny had forgotten all about his intention to share the contents of this strange memory of his with Neffys and Cassie. In fact, he had forgotten that it was strange and possibly important altogether. This lapse in his judgment was sudden and unnatural, but since Sunny couldn't remember things that he had forgotten, he didn't notice anything amiss and went about his business as if nothing had happened. I fed it, he could have realized that this might not have been the first time he had forgotten something important since they arrived at the Ashen Barrow. Standing up, Sunny summoned the midnight shard and glanced darkly at the blood-red leaves of the great tree. Feeling the coolness of the black polished hilt in his hand, he felt a little calmer. Woken up by his quiet movements, Neffys opened her eyes and looked at them, her body tensing up. There was a silent question in her eyes. Sunny shook his head. I don't know yet. Stay with Cassie while he check things out. Leaving the girls behind, Sunny walked forward. He was planning to reach the edge of the island, where the branches of the colossal tree were not as thick and the sky could be seen through the openings in its crown. Technically, he could have sent his shadow Totothus instead of going himself. But in situations like this, where the danger was unknown, Sunny usually preferred to keep the shadow close by in case he needed to sit. Reaching the eastern slope of the Ashen Barrow, He carefully looked up, still hidden in the shadow of the great tree. Up above in the vast gray sky, a small black dot was circling around the island. Sunny's chest became heavy with weariness. Back when the terrible winged beast had first appeared, it looked exactly like this from the distance. Leaving the shadow behind to keep watch on the black dot, He turned and briefly told Neffys and Cassie about his discovery. Right now, it's just flying above the island. I don't know if it's the same creature or not, and when it is going to land. Changing Star frowned. Last time, it wasn't very interested in searching for live prey. Perhaps it's mostly a carrion eater, and thus is only interested in the carapace demon's carcass. Cassie offered her own opinion. Maybe we're too weak and little to satiate it. After all, it never came for the corpses of the scavengers we had slain. As if eating mere beasts ice beneath it. Sunny shook his head. Back then, I'd come for the carapace centurions meat. But it took a few scavengers with it as well before leaving. So I look too optimistic to think that this abomination will not try to used to if given a chance. Neffys thought for a while, then gave him an. You're right. The best course of action would better stay away from the carapace demon for now and hide when it decides to land. Then, looking up, she added. But first, we must observe it to make sure that it's the same creature and confirm its intentions. Not having an argument against this logic, Sunny led the girls to the spot where he had left his shadow. There, they sat on the ground and watched the black dot as circled around the Ashen Barrow. Observing the flying creature left them disturbed and unsure of what to do. The black dot drew closer a few times, allowing them to discern that it was indeed the same terrible monstrosity that they had encountered a few weeks before, or at least a creature of the same type. However, it never got too close to the crown of the great tree, asked how hesitating Toland in its shadow. What a source, as hours passed by, it was joined by 2 other abominations of the same breed, each as horrifying and repulsive as first one was. Now, 3 black dots were circling in the skies above their heads, filling Sunny's heart with dread. One of those creatures, with its corpse-like white body and raven black feathers, with an unnatural mess of powerful limbs protruding from its wide chest, each ending with a set of terrifying talons, was enough to wipe out their entire group. The memory of how easily the creature had broken through the adamantine shell of the carapace centurion with its massive beak was still fresh in his mind. He suspected that these abominations were at least as powerful as carapace demon was, or perhaps even more so. And now there were 3 of them. We'd better hide well, he thought, cold sweat running down his back. However, the flying monsters seemed so reluctant to approach the Ashen Barrow for some reason. They just circled around it, sometimes hesitantly approaching, but then gaining height again. Their behavior was strange and disturbing. After some time, Cassie quietly said, maybe they're not hungry. Sunny blinked, trying to imagine a world where a nightmare creature might not be hungry. Was it even possible? He, on the other hand, I didn't know about these albino chickens, but I'm hungry Ashel. This was true. The 3 of them had not eaten anything since yesterday. Sunny was afraid that if the abominations did decide to land on the island, the loud growls of his stomach would give away his position. Neffys glanced at him and asked, want to eat some grilled chicken? Sunny opened his eyes wide and hissed, didn't even think about it. She stared at them, then turned away with a smile. That was a joke. She knows how to joke. Well, at least someone's sense of humor was worse than his. In the end, their worst fears did not come true. After the sun began to roll toward the horizon, the three flying abominations finally made a decision and left the skies above the Ashen Barrow, flying west in a loose wedge formation. They never descended low enough to notice the three sleepers, let alone landing on the surface of the large island. Sunny was left drenched in sweat and tired from anticipating a disaster, almost disappointed at the fact that all this worrying had turned out to for nothing. Looking at Cassie, who couldn't see that the danger had passed, he said. They're gone. The blind girl exhaled with relief and relaxed, the frown disappearing from her face. Thank heavens, sitting here and waiting was 5 times worse than hiding from one of them at those cliffs. For some reason, Sunny flinched a little. What did you say? I say that waiting for them Toland was very tiresome. He blinked, not understanding why he had reacted so strangely to this innocuous sentence. Did he see a dream having Toto with Cassie in number 5? Right, headed, not that it was anything to think twice about. Oh, yeah, you're right. Then he turned to Neffys and asked, what do you want Toto now? Changing Star looked west, where the black dots had disappeared from sight, and said after a short pause. Let's check the western edge of the island and decide on the next high point to reach. Sunny shrugged, not having any objections. Cassie smiled. Good idea. Who knows, maybe we'll finally see the walls of the castle. Soon, they had crossed the island and approached its western slope. Here, the ground was raised just before plunging down, forming a natural rampart that hid the landscape from their eyes. Neffys was the first to climb up and reach the top. Sunny was just behind her when he felt that something was wrong. Changing Star's posture was somehow strange, stiff and rigid, asked how she had suddenly turned to stone. Stepping on the ashen surface of the natural rampart, he hurriedly looked at Neffys and noticed a grim, resentful expression on her face. He had never seen her in such a state before. Turning his head, Sunny looked west and then narrowed his eyes. His face instantly darkened. Feeling the desire to curse, Sunny gritted his teeth and clenched his fists. Inside his head, only one word was repeating over and over again. Damn, 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 share to your friends. 12. Shares. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 76-76, The Abyss. 1,630 words. Beyond the western edge of the Ashen Barrow, the landscape of the Forgotten Shore was not at all like what Sunny had expected, and hoped, to see. On the side of the island, the slope was much steeper. At the spot where it was supposed to end, the familiar sight of the flat wasteland was nowhere to be seen. Instead, the ground continued to slope downward at a drastic, but still considerably sharp angle. It continued far into the distance. In fact, the whole island appeared to be standing on the edge of a colossal depression in the earth, one that stretched as far as I could see. With its edges slightly curved, it resembled a giant crater left behind by an unimaginable impact. From what Sunny was able to observe, the crater's diameter could only be calculated in hundreds of kilometers. The roots of the giant tree, which could be seen protruding from the soil far below, seemed like tiny blades of grass in comparison to the sheer size of the abyssal chasmus wall. It was like the whole world was tilted on its side, making Sunny's head spin. In short, there were no more high natural features to the west of them. The only way forward was to go down, with no hope of finding shelter from the crushing torrents of the dark sea. Which meant that there was no way forward at all. Their journey to the west had come to an end, and with it, all hope of finding a gateway to the real world was lost. Sunny stared at the desolate landscape, feeling rage and disbelief clawing at his heart. He just couldn't believe that all their struggles were for nothing. But the proof was right in front of him, real and undeniable. Damn it, damn Edel. Had tried to think of some cunning way to solve the situation, but there was nothing his imagination could come up with. The dark sea with all its horrors drowned the world every night, and the only way to escape it was to climb high enough before the sunset. With no heights anywhere in sight, what could he do? Sunny glanced at Neffys, who seemed to be even more crestfallen than him. Her face had turned into a nicy mask, a dark look full of bitterness and resentment in her eyes. He opened his mouth, trying to come up with something to say, but no words came to his mind. In the end, they both remained silent until the distant rumble announced the return of the dark sea. Deep in the colossal crater, dark torrents appeared from beyond the horizon, rushing to fill it to the brim. A little bit stunned, Sunny watched as water level rapidly rose, finally turning the endless chasm into a vast sea of black. Then, it began to overflow, sending an unstoppable flood of water into the wasteland. Flowing past the Ashen Barrow, it rushed inland, crushing against the coral of the Crimson Labyrinth. Soon, the whole world was covered in seething black water. Sunny licked his dry lips and turned to Neffys. After a short pause, he said in a spy voice, I think we found the source of the dark sea. She lingered, watching the last rays of sunshine slowly disappear from the sky, then turned to him with a grim expression on her face. Quote. Let's head back. All three of them felt lost and heartbroken because of the terrible discovery. Cassie in particular seemed to bitterly shocked. It doesn't make sense, it just doesn't, she mumbled one their way to camp. How could it be? Gripping Sunny's shoulder, she quickened her step and asked, are you sure that there's nothing higher than the sea level out there? Are you absolutely sure? He sighed, feeling his mood turning even darker than before. Yes, well looked quite thoroughly. The whole land just goes down, down, and down. It stretches to the horizon, as far as we could see, in all directions except for the east. The Ashen Barrow is right on the edge. The blind girl shook her head. But how could it be? I've seen that we had reached the castle. There must be a way. Sunny remained silent, not knowing how to answer. If there really was a way, he had no idea about it. After a few seconds, Neffys answered instead of him. We will try to come up with something tomorrow. Worst case scenario, we'll have to go around the whole thing. Sunny trembled at the thought. A journey like that would take months. To circle around the colossal crater, they would have to cover many times more distance than they had in the prior weeks, each day bringing the risk of stumbling onto something beyond their ability to resist. And each night bringing the risk of something stumbling onto them. The chances of surviving several months in this hellish place were nothing if not abyssal. Ha, abyssal. With a grimace, Head tried to not think of the worst case scenario. The darkness of the falling night was not the best environment for scary thoughts. Tomorrow, we'll rest, recharge, and think of something tomorrow. It's just like Cassie said, since she saw Yus entering the castle, there must be a way. They reached their temporary camp just before the sun had completely disappeared. Lying on the makeshift bed of fallen leaves, Sunny tiredly closed his eyes and thought. I hope I won't see any dreams today. Then, He slightly frowned. Dreams? Since when am I capable of dreaming in this place? Oh, right, there was that one dream, or was it a memory? What was it about again? I can seem to remember. With that thought disappearing from his mind, He fell asleep. In the morning, the mood between the three of them was pretty somber. No one seemed to talk or do anything, aimlessly staring at the ground or the rustling leaves of the great tree. In addition to the blow of yesterday's revelation, they were also hungry. The corpse of the carapace demon was starting to look more and more appealing, at least to Sunny. However, he was still not at the point of breaking his promise to Cassie. Finally, Neffys broke the silence. Standing up, she looked up with grim resolution and said, I'm going to climb to the top of the tree and take a look around. Maybe I'll notice something that wemist from up high. Sunny stared at the giant tree, suddenly feeling incredibly small. It was truly enormous. The ashen barrow itself was already much taller than the giant knight statue in every other shelter they had seen, and the tree almost dwarfed it in size. Climbing all the way up would take a lot of time and effort, but maybe she would really be able to notice something from that incredible height. He scratched the back of his head and said, Alright, but be careful, keep an eye on the sky. If you notice those winged abominations again, come back down. Changing Star gave him Anad and headed for the tree. Without turning her head, she calmly said Ossiferuel, take care of Cassie while I'm gone. It shouldn't be more than a few hours. Sunny waved AHAND and watched her walk away. Then, He tried to think of something Toto. On a usual day, he would have already started his morning training. But today, he was too hungry. Come on, hunger is not an excuse. Do you think you'll always have a full stomach before a battle? No, so good you pan train. Didn't you want to try how the midnight shard feels in your hand? With ASIGH, Sunny got up. He trained for an hour, enjoying the swift and reliable feeling of his new sword. The long tachi was truly incredible. It was light, maneuverable, and unrelenting. Its edge sang as it cut the air. Sunny already felt asked how it was a part of him. His movements were fluid and measured, almost elegant. After the training session was over, He decided Toto something useful. Walking over to the carapace demon's corpse, Sunny spent some time prying the soul shard out of it. In the end, he gathered all three of the crystals with some effort and stashed them into the seaweed rucksack. What Toto now? After a bit of pondering, he suddenly got Anadia and tried to find the place from his memory, the one where the carapace demon had dropped the transcendent soul shard into the sand. That shard had been brought to the ashen barrow by the subservient centurion and would be a real treat for Neff or Cassie. He quickly found the right spot. However, no matter how hard Sunny looked, He couldn't find the alluring crystal. In the process, a couple more hours had passed by. Stang, it was quite large. Where could it be? He was determined to continue the search. But, at that moment, the shadow that he had left with Cassie noticed movement in the branches of the great tree. Neffys was back. Sunny walked back to the camp, thinking about what she had found. Was there hope for them after all? Or was there only more bad news? By the time he returned, Neff and Cassie were sitting on the ground with relaxed expressions on their faces. She saw something, Sunny thought, suddenly excited. But in the next second, his eyes widened. The two girls were holding something in their hands, their lips painted red. They were eating the fruits of the great tree. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads, redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 77-77, Enthralled. 1,285 words. Sunny stumbled and looked at his companions in utter shock. Neffys and Cassie were each holding a large, round, glistening fruit. The skin of these fruits was smooth and black as onyx, while the succulent insides were red as ruby. Their hands, chins and lips were smeared with red juice, making it look as how they were feasting on blood. The air was filled with an alluring, sweet aroma. Sunny recoiled, but his stomach involuntarily growled, reminding him how hungry he was. Neffys looked at Sunny and offered him a relaxed smile. Hey, He stared at her, lost for words. Finally, after a few seconds had passed, Sunny collected himself and screamed. What do you mean? Hey, what the hell are you doing? His voice was loud, full of disbelief and anger. Both Neff and Cassie turned to face him. They were visibly confused. Why are you shouting? Sunny gaped at them, feeling like he had lost his mind. Why were they so nonchalant about this? What was going on here? Trying to find some sense in the situation, He took a cautious step forward and looked at Neffys. Did she? Wait, what was he thinking about? He was so hungry, it was hard to concentrate on anything except for food. Shaking off the unexpected memory lapse, Sunny remembered what he was about to say and pressed. Why did you change your mind? Changing Star frowned. Changed my mind. About what? He clenched his teeth, thinking that she was trying to fool him. About the fruits. It thought we had agreed to avoid eating them. Neffys blinked, a confused expression appearing on her face. Did we? ... Why? Sunny opened his mouth tonser, but then froze. Actually, why did they make that agreement? I can quite remember. He was sure that there was a reason, but his memory was completely blank. There definitely was an agreement, wasn't there? He was pretty sure that there was, at least up until a few moments ago. Now, however, did he imagine the whole thing? There really was no reason not to eat the alluring fruits, especially when the three of them were so hungry. No, wait, that's not right. Are you all right, Sunny? He flinched and glanced at Neffys, who was looking at them with concern. Suddenly, Sunny felt lost and confused. What were they talking about? Something about some sort of agreement. What agreement? Not knowing how to answer, he just stood there with a frown on his face and pouted. This ice embarrassing. Did I completely space out while she was talking to him? Fortunately, Cassie quickly came to his rescue. She always knew how to make the situation less awkward. Are you angry because Wes started eating without you? He looked at her and noticed the big, delicious fruit in her hands. His stomach growled. So hungry. I guess. Cassie smiled and pointed to the ground, where another fruit was placed on the pile of fallen leaves. Her teeth were smeared with red juice. Didn't worry. Neff brought 3 of them, 1 for each. How nice of her. Sunny picked up the fruit, looked at it, and took a bite without thinking. Instantly, his mouth was filled with delightful, cool sweetness. The succulent, juicy fruit was probably the most delicious thing he had ever tasted. It was both nourishing and refreshing, with rich texture and soft, lingering aftertaste. The ruby flesh practically melted on his tongue, making his whole body tingle. It was pure joy in the form of a fruit. Wow, despite his delight, Sunny felt disturbed for some reason. Something was very wrong about the whole situation, but what? Taking another bite, He frowned and tried to understand the source of this anxious feeling. It was hard to think about anything except for how heavenly the fruit of the soul tree tasted, but he forced himself to concentrate. Soul tree, since when? Wait, don't get distracted. Sunny was finally able to pinpoint the source of the strangeness. It was his shadow. When he reached out to pick up the fruit, the shadow did not copy his movements, asked how reluctant to touch it. Even now it was motionless, refusing to mimic him eating the fruit. Weird, what is it with this guy? Sunny took one more bite and looked at the shadow, lost in thought. The shadow had an eccentric temper, but it rarely did something without a reason. If it didn't like the fruit, there had to be something wrong with the fruit. Sunny frowned, suddenly feeling a sense of dread grip his heart. There was something wrong with the. Damn, why is it so hard to think about this stuff? There was something wrong with the fruit. Why would there? Wait, ice this why I screamed at Nefis. She broke an agreement. What was the agreement? Sunny was at the precipice of remembering something very important. Hefeld asked how he just needed to pull on the thread, and the whole truth would reveal itself. Something terrible was going to happen. I failed. But then, Sunny got distracted. Something unexpected happened, something that required his full attention. Instantly, He somehow forgot all about the problem with the soul tree's fruits. Because at that moment, the spell was talking into his ear. Your shadow grows stronger. What? He blinked, then looked at the delicious fruit in his hands. The spell announced the increase in his power right after Sunny swallowed his third bite. Stunned, he raised his head and looked at Nefis. Changing Star, too, was staring at the fruit with a strange expression on her face. Feeling his gaze, she looked up. Sunny licked his lips. Did you? At the same time, Nefis said. I just absorbed a point of soul essence. Without saying anything, they both turned to Cassie. The blind girl was enthusiastically devouring the fruit. Red juice was flowing down her chin and dripping to the ground. Stopping for a moment, she smiled. Actually, I received mine a few bites ago. Sunny's eyes widened. Excitedly, he summoned the runes and found the right cluster. Shadow fragments, 97 1,000ths. He really received a fragment. He received a shadow fragment without risking his life in a battle against deadly monsters. Finally, Sunny was able to realize why the carapace demon had been suffocated on the soul tree and its fruits. These fruits were pure magic. Forgetting all about the uneasy feeling, he raised his hand and greedily bit into the succulent, delicious, nourishing flesh. Late in the evening, when the sun was already hidden behind the horizon and the dark sea had once again turned the ashen barrow into a lonely island, the three of them were preparing for the night. They had moved their camp tourist between the roots of the great tree. With newfound energy received from consuming miraculous fruits, all their worries seemed to fade. With no way to move further west, Nefis, Sunny and Cassie had decided to rest for a few days before making any decisions. They deserved a short vacation. The Ashen Barrows was a perfect place to recuperate. There were no monsters in the surrounding wasteland, it was large enough to protect them from the horrors of the sea, and they had plenty of food thanks to the soul tree. What is more, that food could even provide them with power. Where else would they be able to grow stronger without risking their lives? As far as Ashel goes, this place was almost a paradise. Sunny lay on the makeshift mattress of fallen leaves, feeling relaxed and optimistic for the first time in many days. Things seemed to be getting better. Before falling asleep, he glanced at the mighty branches of the great tree and thought with avid regret. With the carapace demon gone, there's none to protect this magnificent tree anymore. When we continue our journey, it will be completely defenseless. What a shame. His consciousness was already half asleep. However, one last thought entered Sunny's mind right before he completely slipped into the embrace of darkness. What a shame that no one will be here to observe it, and feed it, and help it spread its seeds. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 78 to 78. Bliss. 1,236 words. In the morning, Sunny was woken up by the gentle rustling of leaves. Opening his eyes, he saw rays of sunshine falling through the scarlet crown of the soul tree, painting the world in soft shades of pink. The sight was beautiful and tranquil. It felt as how none of the dangers and terrors of the dream realm could reach him here. A soft breeze touched his skin, bringing with it coolness and the smell of fallen leaves. For the first time in a long while, Sunny felt at peace. Is this what a vacation feels like? If so, their decision to have one was the best decision ever. He sat up with a yawn and lazily looked around. Cassie and Nefis were already awake. Seeing them put a smile on Sunny's face. Why the hell am I grinning? Shaking his head, Sunny put on a serious expression and said, Good morning. The girls greeted him. Then, Nefis slightly tilted her head and asked, Hey, do you remember why we didn't leave anyone to keep watch last night? Sunny blinked. Indeed, why hadn't Tanyon guarded the camp? No, I guess we were too tired. Plus, it's so safe here, why deprive ourselves of sleep? She frowned. Sunny expected Changing Star to berate them, but, unexpectedly, she just shrugged. Quote. I guess. That's not like her. Am I not the only one in a great mood? To make Nev feel better, He pointed down and said, Don't worry, my shadow would have warned you if anything had happened. She seemed to have forgotten about her question already, returning to whatever she had been doing before. All three of them were easily distracted these days. Sunny sighed. So, what are you guys going to do today? Cassie turned to him with a smile and answered in a teasing tone. Nothing, we're in vacation, remember, so we're just going tourist and relax. Sounds like a plan. Speaking about plans, at that moment, Cassie scowled and said with a comically strict expression. You too, Sunny, you are not allowed to plan, plot and scheme. Just sit back and enjoy the day. Alright, Sunny scratched the back of his head. Alright, Hefeld asked how he was forgetting something. But what? Looking at Nefis, Sunny hesitated and asked. Remind me, why did you climb the soul tree yesterday? She glanced at them in confusion. I didn't really remember. Toget the fruits. Sunny smiled at the mention of the miraculous fruits and nodded. Yeah, that makes sense. A few days passed by. Sunny, Neffys and Cassie spent them idling away, not concerned with anything in the world. Their tired bodies and minds needed time to rest. They slept until noon, ate the delightful fruits and sat around the fire, talking or simply soaking in the warmth. Sometimes, they would play games or engage in other forms of entertainment. Other times, they would keep to themselves, enjoying the almost forgotten feeling of privacy. Sunny had been a loner for most of his life, so this past few weeks that he had spent side by side with other people, without even Amanu To himself, were a taxing experience. Hellish the opportunity to be alone with his thoughts once again. Luckily, the island was large enough for the three of them to stay apart if they didn't wish to be disturbed. Not that it happened often. At first, he had expected that lazing around doing nothing would very quickly grow boring, but surprisingly, it'd not. He felt perfectly fine simply laying on the ground and staring at the gently swaying branches of the soul tree, caught in a blissful reverie. In moments like these, he would lose track of time, often realizing that entire hours had passed only when the sun was about to set. The concept of time, in general, had become strangely hard to grasp. Sunny wasn't entirely sure how many days they had spent on the peaceful island. He was pretty sure that it was less than a week, but couldn't remember the exact amount. Not being able to remember something had become a common occurrence. All three of them were turning increasingly absent-minded and forgetful. Sometimes, Sunny would catch himself straining to remember details of his previous life or notice the strangeness of their behavior. But a minute later, he would forget about these concerns, distracted by some innocuous thought or occurrence. His memory was becoming hazier and hazier. The only clear things in it were how delicious and refreshing the magical fruits were, how pleasant it was to live under the shade of the soul tree, and how magnificent it was. The tree was beautiful, benevolent and generous. It protected them from the cursed blight of the Crimson Labyrinth, kept the monsters away and provided nourishment both for their bodies and for their soul cores. Sunny was becoming increasingly convinced that finding the majestic soul tree was a true blessing. The thought of leaving its gifts behind and returning to the horror of the outside world seemed less and less attractive. Why leave when they were perfectly happy here? Well, at least two of them were. While Neffys was as carefree and tranquil as Sunny and Cassie in the beginning, as time went by, she grew strangely despondent and gloomy. It seemed as how she had reverted back to her old, distant and unsociable self. Instead of chatting or relaxing with them, Changing Star ended up spending most of her time sitting on the western edge of the island alone, staring into the distance with bleak eyes. Sunny had no idea what was wrong. He was worried about her. Not even the frequent, insistent lapses of memory managed to overcome his concern about Neff. On none of the evenings, Sunny approached the western slope of the island, feeling as how his head was about to split from pain. For some reason, he kept forgetting the reason for this visit on the way here. It took all of his willpower to hold on to his intentions. He wanted to check on Neffys. Just like always, she was sitting at the ridge of the western edge, gazing into the distance. Sunny climbed onto the ridge and sat down, looking at her with hesitation. Hey, Neff. Changing Star glanced at them. Her indifferent expression was back, making any attempt to understand her true emotions futile. However, it was clear that she was not all right. Hey, Sunny scratched the back of his head. Was he seeing things, or was her hair a bit longer than before? Why aren't you enjoying the vacation? Changing Star frowned. After a while, she said, Didn't we need to keep moving west? He raised his eyebrows, surprised. West? What isn't the west? Neff's frown deepened, turning into a scowl. I didn't remember, but I feel. She grew silent, then said quietly. I feel like I have Toto something very important. Abandon the soul tree. What a strange idea. Sunny pondered for some time, trying to understand where she got the idea that they had to move somewhere. Finally, east. Why west? Oh, all directions. Neffys turned to him. There was a strange, pained expression on her face. Gritting her teeth, she whispered. I didn't know. Sunny sighed. If she didn't know, then he, of course, had no idea either. All Heck knew was that he wanted to make her feel better. But how? Sunny frowned, trying to think of a way. He felt that there was something very obvious that he was forgetting. Something that would instantly erase Neff's suffering. When the realization hit him, he froze. Of course, how could I forget? The answer was so clear. He just had to climb the soul tree and find an especially juicy fruit for her to eat. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 79-79, Twist of Fate. 1212 words. It was already dark when Sunny returned to the great tree. Cassie was asleep, snuggled comfortably under her cloak. There was a peaceful smile on her face. Sweet dreams. She wasn't bothered by her terrible visions in a long time. Everything became better since they decided to stay on the tranquil island. Everything except for Neffsmooth. She didn't even bother to return to camp today, staying at the western edge of the barrow. Sunny didn't like that she was so close to the black water. He sighed. I need to get some tasty fruits for her as soon as possible. She definitely would not be able to stay sad after eating the magical fruits. They were so sweet and delicious. Sunny began salivating just from thinking about them. Single quote. Maybe I'll find one for myself, too. In the beginning, they took turns climbing to the lower branches of the soul tree to gather fruits. Lately, though, Neffy seemed to be distracted by her strange melancholy. As a result, the group relied on him to bring down fruits for everyone. He had already picked the lowest branches clean, choosing the ripest fruits first. Later ones were smaller and not as evenly, although they still tasted amazing. Since each fruit was big enough to satiate a person for a long time, they rarely ate more than one in a day. The ripest fruits provided Sunny with 1 or 2 shadow fragments, while the smaller ones gave 1 or even none at all. I wonder how many shadow fragments I accumulated. Should be more than 100, right? Maybe even 110. No way. We've been here just for a few days, a week at most. Heckle just summoned the runes and check, but somehow the thought didn't even occur to him. If it did, he would have been horrified. Forgetting all about the shadow fragments, Sunny looked up and scratched the back of his head. Initially, he was planning to climb the tree in the morning and explore higher than he had previously gone, looking for the best, most delicious fruit possible to give to Neff. But after thinking about it, he decided to not wait until the night was over. He could see perfectly in the dark, after all, and this way, he would be able to give changing star a delightful present much sooner. Stepping close to the trunk of the miraculous tree, Sunny began climbing. The first stretch was the most difficult since he had nothing to grab except for small cracks and bumps on the smooth, obsidian bark. Reaching the branches required a lot of effort. However, he was already accustomed to it. Moving his hands and feet almost on instinct, Sunny got higher and higher. Soon, he was already pulling himself on top of an enormous, wide branch. These first branches were as wide as roads. He sat down and rested for some time, enjoying the coolness of the night air. Sunny had never climbed the soul tree in the dark before. Without the bright sunbeams falling through the leaves, it looked strangely different. The vibrant magnificence was gone, replaced with eerie stillness. The rustling of scarlet leaves did not seem calming and tranquil anymore. In fact, it made Sunny shudder. It sounded like thousands and thousands of trapped souls, all screaming in agony. What's up with me today? How can I even think of such things? What a fool. Good thing that the great tree can hear me, otherwise I'd be so ashamed. Please forgive me, soul tree. Shaking his head, Sunny stood up and continued climbing. He was very disappointed in himself. After all the good things that the tree had given them, he had stupidly doubted its benevolence, its greatness, its desire to devour, always ravenous, always growing, starving, hungry, forever. How ungrateful. Why did he even begin to think about? What exactly was he thinking about? Sunny frowned, failing to recall his train of thought. Whatever. I'm here to find a tasty fruit for Neff, not practice my reasoning. Climbing higher and higher, he soon abandoned the area that they had explored before. The crown of the great tree was vast enough to form a maze of its own. The large branches grew chaotically in all directions, twisting and crossing each other, with thick foliage blocking lines of sight and making any attempt of looking for the fruits difficult and time-consuming. Still, Sunny was determined to continue. He figured that if he went really high, where sunlight was denser, the fruits would be much riper. They had never tried a fruit from the higher branches. If he could find a really amazing one, Neffy's would have to change her mind and abandon her strange thoughts of leaving the island. After all, these fruits were magical. Maybe she'll even smile. Encouraged, Sunny continued climbing. Time slowly passed. After a long while, Sunny finally decided that he had climbed high enough. He weighed a sensor how many hours ago he had started the ascent, but judging by the soreness of his muscles and the visibly diminished width of the branches, he was somewhere in the upper part of the tree. Stepping on one of the branches, he slowly walked forward and looked from side to side. Searching for the fruits was not easy. It required good perception and patience. And a great sense of equilibrium, of course. Falling from this height would not be a great experience. In fact, it would be his last. Carefully observing the surroundings, Sunny moved further and further away from the trunk of the great tree. The branches were softly swaying under his feet. A few times, he jumped from one to another, causing a change in the melody of rustling leaves. One way, he noticed several hanging fruits. They looked ripe and delicious, but none of them was really special. And he wanted to find the most wonderful fruit possible. Finally, Sunny got so far that the branches grew really narrow and thin. Now, they were almost the same size as To's normal tree, barely able to support his weight. But he still did not find a suitable gift for Neffy's. Sunny helplessly looked around, crestfallen. He really thought that he would be able to. Then, he noticed something strange. Some distance away from him, the branches just above the one he was standing on were twisted downward, as how weighed down by something. However, he couldn't quite see what it was behind the almost impenetrable wall of leaves. In fact, he only noticed the anomaly because it was dark. In the light of day, the bright color of the soul tree's foliage would make the shape of the branches indiscernible. But in Sunny's night vision, all colors were muted, almost turning into various shades of gray. Interesting. Jumping, he grabbed onto a higher branch and pulled himself up. Then, careful not to fall, Sunny approached the leaf barrier and forced his way through. In the process, he had to enhance his strength and agility with the help of the shadow, otherwise, he would either have had to turn back or tumbled down to his death. Finally, he freed himself from the last layer of leaves and took a step forward. Then, Sunny froze, his eyes opening wide with wonder. Right in front of him, hidden from the world in the secretive pocket of twisted branches, a giant, elaborate bird nest rested between the scarlet leaves. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 80-80, Spirit of Exploration. 1,179 words. The nest was spherical in shape, with a round hole at the center of it. Usually, such a nest would be made out of grass and twigs, but this one was constructed from the branches of the great tree, each at least as thick as Salmon's arm. These branches were twisted and interwoven together in a chaotic pattern, creating gapless, onyx black walls. Sunny had never seen anything like it. Birds were a rare sight in the real world, let alone giant ones. The size of the entrance into the nest was large enough for a small truck to pass through. The nest itself was several times bigger. Wow, for a second, he felt a sense of fear, afraid that the giant bird was somewhere near. But then his fears disappeared. The nest looked abandoned. It was ancient and empty, some of its parts already on the verge of collapse. It was asked how thousands of years had passed since anyone had been in this hidden, secretive place. The air was filled with the feeling of lonesomeness and desolation. Makes sense. If I barely managed to pass through the leaves, how would a giant monster do it without leaving a giant hole in the barrier? Sunny hesitated, caution and curiosity wrestling against each other inside his heart. On one hand, exploring ancient nests was not the best ideas anywhere, let alone inside the dream realm. It posed great risks. On the other hand, it also could lead to a great reward. Plus, wasn't I just too damn interesting? In the end, Sunny decided to climb inside the nest to satiate his curiosity. He had convinced himself that it was safe following an unexpected train of thought. In his warped state of mind, Sunny was convinced that the soul tree was a great and benevolent being, one that protected them from the terrible threats hiding in the outside world. If so, how could anything having Toto with the great tree be unsafe? Moving closer to the entrance of the nest, he balanced on the edge of the branch and tried to look inside. However, he wasn't tall enough to see anything except for the inner side of the nest's roof. Since his position was pretty precarious, Sunny decided not to delay the inevitable and jumped, throwing himself upand over the lip of the entrance. A moment later, Helen did own a soft surface. The lower part of the nest was covered in a thick cushion of white, silky spiderwebs. Time had made them brittle and pliable like sand. There was so much spiderweb around that, for a moment, Sunny thought that he had fallen into a John white cocoon. But no, it was just a nest. And there, in the center of it, was a... Sunny blinked. At the center of the nest, there was an egg. A jaunt, ancient egg that was Astal Ashwas, gray and seemingly lifeless, asked how turned to stone by the passage of time. Forgetting toe breath, Sunny looked around, making sure that there was nothing, and no one, else around. But no, the giant nest was empty and silent, with not even a stray shadow hiding anywhere in sight. How fascinating. Sunny felt strangely excited. The feeling of discovering something incredible, something that no one except for him had ever seen, filled him with a deep sense of wonder and satisfaction. He had never known that there was such a side to him, one full of an explorer's passion. Let's check this thing out. Walking on the soft silk, Sunny slowly circled the massive egg and studied it. At a first glance, it seemed made of stone. The surface of the egg was colored in various shades of gray, which were overlaid over each other like moving clouds. This pattern was strangely beautiful, giving the egg a mysterious aura. But overall, it was just big and smooth. Sunny scratched the back of his head, then stepped closer and put his hand on the surface of the egg. Immediately, he felt a strong sense of astonishment. The egg was warm to the touch. Is it still alive? In the next second, Sunny felt a strange pull affecting his core. It was asked how the egg was trying to steal his life force. He jerked his hand away and looked at the egg with dark apprehension. The damn thing was not only alive, but also capable of sucking the life out of anything that touched it. It only failed to eat his soul because of own reason. As far as Sunny knew, he was the only existence in two worlds without an actual soul core. He had the mysterious shadow core instead. That's his life force had not been affected. Phew, that was close. Looking at the giant egg, Sunny thought about how to get back at it. The nest, without a doubt, once belonged to an extremely powerful nightmare creature. Therefore, its spawn was also a being of considerable strength. However, due to some unknown reason, that being had not been able to hatch and was left behind by its parent, destined to remain trapped within the egg for all eternity. Or at least until some unfortunate fool came close enough to fit with soul essence and give it enough power to break free. Luckily, I'm not a fool. Wait, maybe I am. His decisions have been very strange lately. He couldn't quite explain some of them, including this latest one. It was asked how his thinking ability had been reduced. Whatever, I'm still smarter than a damn egg. Like a true explorer, he went where no one had gone before and made an incredible discovery. He found an unbelievably mysterious, rare being, one that not a single human had ever heard of. Naturally, he had to kill it. That's what the spirit of exploration was all about, wasn't it? Summoning the midnight shard, Sunny thrust it into the stone surface of the egg, causing a rain of sparks to fall on the spiderwebs. The sharp blade slid harmlessly across the stone, leaving only a shallow scratch on it. Tough bastard, the egg was sturdy enough to withstand a strike from an awakened weapon. If it was that resilient, Sunny was scared to imagine how powerful the adult monster would be. It was definitely not an average nightmare creature. But then, he was not an average sleeper. His shadow flowed from his hands onto the midnight shard, turning the polished metal of the blade black and lusterless. Immediately, a cold aura radiated from the sword, making it feel sharp enough to cut the world apart. Stepping forward, Sunny raised the shard above his head and sliced down, delivering a crushing blow. Enhanced by the shadow, the dark blade bit into the stone surface of the egg and split it apart. Cracks ran through the giant stone egg as Sunny sword plunged into it. A flash of sinister crimson light shined through the cracks, then disappeared, leaving behind nothing but darkness. A torrent of viscous, black liquid flowed onto the white spiderwebs. In the ensuing silence, Sunny heard the spell's bewitching voice. You have slain a great devil, vile thieving bird spawn. Your shadow grows stronger. You have received a memory. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads, redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report.